There we go. Brand new world. All right.
Here we are, day 4.
Day 4. All right.
These are chock full. There's 11 days of reefing, chock full of information in like 3-hour chunks. We did you a solid, broke them each one of the chunks out individually.
Yeah, so you can watch them. Go check out the playlist. All right, so this is episode of 52 Weeks of Reefing, 14 through what?
17.
Through 17. We broke them down. That means that we're talking about UV sterilizers. Definitely that one's totally different than that. We're talking about auto top-offs. We're talking about protein skimmers, and I missed one in
Adding
here.
fish.
Adding fish, totally different than that one as well. Revolutionary, actually, in fact. So we're going to start it off, though, with the number one most important thing, which is our Doyle Bunsen quote of the day.
Poker quote for you poker players.
Yes. It's amazing how much correlation there is between gambling and
reefing.
Yes.
It is a gamble.
It's like a series of controlled bets.
Yeah.
That is all it really is. So informed, and the people that are the most successful are the ones that make the best bets. It's pretty interesting. All right. So what Doyle Brunson says today is 90% of the hands aren't shown in a poker game.
90%.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're trying to protect your chips, you throw away your cards. 90% of the time.
If you don't want to show the world you're a failure, you just muck them.
Yep.
Right? Nope. I went up against the best and I lost.
And how can you prove it? Just go out there and search the forums, the groups, the this and that, and find out, and just kind of look at the proportion of how many people actually share, hey guys, look I failed. Hey guys, look, I failed, versus, hey, look at my awesome tank. Or maybe just asking questions.
Yeah, really I think the inverse of this is true then too, which is if 90% of the hands aren't shown in a poker game, the ones that you see are the winners.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so the 90% of the failures that are happening in the background are the stuff that you never, ever, ever see.
But it's the most valuable lessons to learn. It is valuable to share your wins, but even more so the failures, because that's where we all can learn from.
All right, so in that spirit, UV sterilizers are worth the time, money, and effort. And this is one of those things where I tied these ones together, is because there's so many people who run into fish disease, don't know what to do with it. Killing your pets is not something that you post on Facebook. Killing your pets is not something that you post on social. It's embarrassing. You're not proud of it. You're probably sad.
Yeah.
It just isn't something that you would do. And then the people that are successful, you end up kind of seeing this, like the people that didn't fail. And what are those things those people share? So UV sterilizers, a core belief on UV sterilizers.
So we're talking about episode 14 of the 52 Weeks of Reefing. Are UV sterilizers worth the time, money, and effort was the title of that one. Our core belief
is embrace that parasites and disease are in the tank. UV will be the reason why it doesn't matter.
Yeah, it doesn't matter for you.
Yes. I'll say it one more time, because this is very different than the message that we gave in 52 Weeks of Reefing. I'm being more brave. There's more experience on this one. Embrace that parasites and disease are in the tank. UV will be why it doesn't matter to you, right? And
Powerful.
Today's episode is actually going to be more not just UV. We're also going to incorporate some of the other things in how you manage fish disease in your tank. So there wasn't really an entire episode on this one in 52 that encapsulated this. So we're going to fit it into this one. So what is the first thing that we believe matters most in relation to this?
So matters most, first thing, number one is eradication is a 1% solution, meaning like eradication. Can you 100% eradicate the parasites and disease that are in the tank? We just told you that embrace that they're in the tank. They're just in there. So eradication is only a 1% solution. So what's the other 99%?
Yeah, and so it is. It's a 1%. It's chasing like this kind of like fairy.
This sterile environment that had nothing. There's no exposure to anything bad or potentially harmful.
The question about whether or not it's possible to eradicate that stuff from the tank isn't real, because it is. It just takes an enormous amount of effort. the problem that I've seen is, Humblefish did it pretty well on his forum, and he describes eradication versus management, meaning accept it's in there, manage to that fact, or eradicate it. And here's the thing is, as you get further and further along in your skill set, eradication becomes more and more real.
Oh yeah.
It wasn't real day one.
No.
Most people are not going to do those things that are required for that. And so the reason that I want to say that first is eradication is a 1% solution is because what ends up happening is so much of the community ends up shaming people that don't do it perfect, the way that they would do it. Instead of recognizing that that person's actually doing it 90% better than everyone else. If you can say I'm doing it better, 90% better than everyone else, and I'm doing it with a lot less effort, I think not only are you helping people by sharing that information and that experience, but actually getting hung up on that last 10% is a disservice to the community.
Oh yeah.
Right? Unless you frame it up right, which is like, yeah, dude, here's the place, the 80-20 of it, 80% of the results, 20% of the effort. If you want the other 20%, this is what it looks like. It's hard, but I'll show you how to do it when you're ready. That's a helpful conversation instead of destructive and shaming.
Is that you think about the path of what absolute eradication looks like and how would you achieve it? It's not just getting rid of the ick, so 70, how was it, 72 days or however many days for, the life cycles and tank transfers and all this other stuff. And all right, I've beat ick off of my live fish. There's corals that you have to worry about bringing in these diseases and parasites. There's cleanup crew, inverts, snails that you would have to start considering. Like the laundry list of complete eradication and how to get there just starts piling up, and you go, oh, well, anything that you ever put in the tank would have to be quarantined to some degree and eradicated off of those.
Yeah, so not only do you need a medicated quarantine up front, I need a medicated quarantine for every snail, fish, coral, drop of water, hand, everything that is ever going to touch this tank. And the quarantine needs to be 10 feet or something away from the other tank, and they need it all sitting there for months. So
it's a huge undertaking.
Yeah, if you are willing to sign up for, I'm going to maintain, I'm going to medicate every last fish that goes in there. I'm going to tank transfer method them. I'm going to medicate them with copper or whatever other disease, or each one of these things has a different chemical for them. But,
right.
you're going to go after flukes. You're going to go after the whole thing. If you're going to do all of that, sweet. Now the tank probably has minimal to no parasites in it. You'll never get 100% certainty, but at this point I will know that, hey, there's a very low likelihood many of these things made it into the tank. You could probably PCR test it to be sure. All right, but then every last coral from the beginning to the end is going to spend weeks to months inside of another system that can't get another fish or coral in there in that
You're
time.
cross-contaminating
and then every snail, and it needs to not even be in the same room.
By the time that you actually are able to achieve that level, I would imagine that I just picture this laboratory environment where you have full body suits with airlock chambers that you go from one place to the other, and maybe downstairs can't be. You think about your ventilation system, even if you have the systems downstairs. When the ventilation system kicks on, it's not just that it's 10 feet. Now it's running through the ventilation system, all this other stuff. It's a daunting task to me, almost unattainable.
Well, it's kind of to me like if we could all say, if in my car I installed a roll cage, a 4-point harness, and I wore a helmet while I drive to work, would I be safer? Yeah, but I'm not willing. So there's got to be a point. I'm willing to put a seatbelt on. I'm willing to buy a car with airbags. I'm willing to do all these things. I'm willing to drive safe, but I'm not going to put a roll cage, a 4-point harness, and a helmet while I drive. So it's the same thing. So competent management. What we believe matters most is the next one is competent management is the 80% solution with only 20% of the effort. Meaning manage to the fact that they're in there. This doesn't necessarily have to be the end game for you, but for most people, this will be the giant leap forward from where they are today.
Yeah, and we're talking 20% of the effort. If you put 20% of effort into managing for these pests, you're 80% of the way there.
It's mostly just what types of fish do you pick, the husbandry, the diet, and UV. We'll elaborate on that a little bit, but like if you do those 4 things, you're doing it better than 80-90% of the people out there, and can pat yourself on the back. All right, so QT is not eradication, but it's an evolutionary step that we need to catch up to. So this is the piece that
So
people
far behind.
confuse a lot about. It's like, all right, well, if I quarantine my fish, then I will never have these problems in my tank. Well, we just described why that's not the case, because anything that has a life cycle that spends anything off of the fish, it can settle out in sand and snails and crabs. It
can travel through
it
air.
it's in the bag of water. It can be anything. So quarantine is not an eradication tool. It's part of an overall path to eradication, but in itself it is not. But here's the thing.
The problem is,
if I use the QT, if I do a QT either because I bought it from somebody or I learned how to do it myself or the fish store is doing it proper, well, then in that case, I will definitely have eliminated many of the pests that are ways that you can introduce these things into the tank. Like, eliminated the ways that amount of flukes, parasites, ick, velvet, all these different diseases that can make it into the tank. I've dramatically reduced the chances that I'm going to put something in there that's going to cause an immediate outbreak.
Yeah, but what we also believe matters most here is that it's a step we all need to catch up to. Is kind of one of those points that we talk about it, and you see it talked about all the time. There's some people that actually make the effort and attempt to set up a home quarantine system. It just hasn't become the status quo across the entire hobby. Like, this is just what you do as part of the hobby. It's an option right now. And if we can get it to a part of the process to building a successful reef, then a lot of these problems start happening less and less and less and less.
I'm going to say it. This is going to be the bravest thing I'd probably say in the whole thing. It's because in any other area where you buy a pet, the assumption is that you're buying a healthy pet that won't get my other pets sick, whether it be a puppy, a cat, a bunny, or whatever.
And all of those, in a majority of the time when you get those pets, they are required to have vaccinations and shots and deworming and all these other things.
Is like,
you can't even buy it.
Things.
Yeah, you can't even buy it. You cannot take your pet to the vet unless they already had all that stuff beforehand.
Yeah.
They're going to have to get it.
There is an expectation that the pet was healthy. In this case, it's worse. It's not only is there not the expectation that the pet is healthy, it's actually like the people selling them generally hide the fact that it almost certainly isn't.
That it has afflicted.
It's almost certainly been exposed to parasites that you're going to introduce your tank with this thing, right? And they're afraid to tell you that, hey, I have another option that will cost a little bit more. So, but like, it's like, would you buy a puppy that doesn't have all of its shots and isn't healthy? Do you really want to save that $100, or whatever it is? No, I want the puppy to. The reason I got it is to bring joy to my family, not to bring a sick animal in my house.
Yeah.
It's the sick. In fact, it's going to cause problems down the road. Like, so with a sick puppy, you're going to add all these vet bills afterward that the $100 just could have avoided.
Yeah.
In this case, it's going to be the sick pet that I added in there killed all my other pets.
Hundreds of dollars, thousands of dollars.
Yeah. And so that is kind of the weird point that that when we say that QT is not eradication, but it's an evolutionary step that we all need to catch up to. I'm talking the whole industry that I don't know, man. There's a lot of pushback on the cost of the animals and they're going up. And so it may be that there will always be a cheap option. We just need to get better at the DIY portion of this.
Right.
Like, if you want to become a veterinarian at your own house and DIY QT and figure out how to do it, well, then that part should get better too. But there should be another area of the whole industry that allows you to, purchase pets healthy to begin with. Then there's the third people that are just rolling the dice. Well, that has kind of the, like the unexpected or intended results of just rolling the dice. Who knows what's going to happen? Like again, 90% of the hands are never shown. So right.
We also believe that matters most is that UV doesn't eliminate parasites, it just controls the population. And one time's turnover through that UV sterilizer is enough for something that replicates in days and weeks.
Yeah, so the life cycle of ick is measured in weeks, meaning it lives on the fish, it falls off, it replicates, and it goes back into the water, catches on the fish, and then it multiplies population every single one of those times.
Yeah.
But the life cycle is in weeks. With velvet, and the reason why it kills fish so much faster is the life cycle is measured in days, right? But in any case, if I have a UV sterilizer, which again, the UV sterilizer doesn't kill the parasite in most cases, what it does
Stops them
is
from replicating.
Sterilizes it,
Yeah.
stops them from replicating. So if I pass virtually all of the water through a UV once every single hour, I'm going to keep the population of those parasites way down.
Because you're catching them at any point of their life cycle.
It's not one little tiny speck of ick that's killing a fish. It's when the ick overwhelms the fish's ability to deal with
Right,
it.
yeah,
Right?
yeah.
So, that is the fundamental problem that people just didn't pick up in the past is I don't need to eradicate it from the system for it to be valuable.
No.
I just need to
manage
keep
it.
the population of these parasites so low that it doesn't overcome the fish's immune system. And something that replicates in a matter of weeks, if I process all of the water once an hour, I can probably do that.
It'll catch up.
Yeah.
We also believe it matters most is UV can prevent outbreaks of most parasites that spend part of their life cycle off the fish. There's some parasites and pests and diseases that just don't leave the fish. They're on the fish and they bring it down. There are parasites like ick that spend part of their life off. And that's where this whole prevention thing we're talking about, catching them in a point of their life cycle when they're free floating in the water column. Are you going to get every single last little speck that ever were to float in the water column? No, but you're getting more than none.
Yep. So what I would say is something like brook lives on the fish and doesn't spend any of its life cycle in the water. So it's probably not going to be very valuable to eliminating it. And even if one falls off and lands on another fish, it may replicate just that one and overwhelm the fish. So it may be that it ends up going through the sterilizer, the one that fell off too. It'll probably reduce the chances, but not the most valuable tool here. But the things that matter most to you guys are probably ick and velvet.
Yeah.
If you 80-20 the amount of diseases that you guys are going to run
Those
into,
are big ones.
that
Yeah.
is the two that are probably, velvet's the one that's going to, before you know what to do, it's already killed everything.
Yeah, but UV can prevent it even if it's one that only spends its life cycle on the fish. And because if I'm running a UV sterilizer beforehand, prior to the infection or affliction, there's a chance that UV sterilizer gets to it before it afflicts the fish.
So another piece in here, the next one, what we believe matters most, is UV can be a solution to an ick outbreak, but not most other pests.
Yeah, we're talking after they're already afflicted with the pest or disease. You actively see ick on your fish, and you go install the UV sterilizer after the fact. The brook and of the brooks of the world, those fish are pretty much already gone by the time you see it.
Yeah, by the time you've ordered or bought a UV and installed it, the velvet is already overtaken.
But as a part of a holistic management approach, you adding UV when you see the ick, plus the other things that we're going to talk about as far as management, you have a fighting chance.
Yeah. So the reason I pointed this one out is this is a change from what I said in 2015.
Once you see it, it's a too late. Why
it
get
isn't
UV?
a tool for it's a prevention tool, not a treatment tool. I'm going to backtrack on that as I better understand the life cycle of the organism, and I've talked to people that have made me believe otherwise. And this is why. And actually, we've seen it here now too.
Yeah.
This is why. Is because with ick, you have life cycle. If you catch it and like the whole thing is just overwhelmed with ick and the whole tank is like a day away from dead,
Very slim.
you're probably not a great tool.
Yeah.
But if you see that just one fish is breaking out in ick,
Couple spots, few spots.
it means that that guy is going to fall off. He's going to go turn it into 20. He's going to go
Come
and
back.
replicate, or if it doesn't turn into many more than that. And it will just create a pot. It will overwhelm the other fish.
Yeah.
However, if you see that, and the first thing you do is go out and buy a UV and you put it on the tank immediately. And by immediately meaning, don't spend time trying to figure out how to plumb it into your system.
Get some soft tubing, drop a pump in the system, and let it just get it going.
Just throw a pump over the edge. It'll be ugly for a minute. Get the ick under control, and then figure out how you're going to plumb it in for a later day. But just essentially create a closed loop.
This is this is one that we learned on the 900 over here, because that purple tang, when we dropped the fish in there, and the ick was probably on some of the live rock that we repurposed for this tank to make it an insta tank. In which case, when that purple tang went in there, he was stressed out for being in a new environment, and guess what? Covered in ick. Like he was ick covered. But we did the UV sterilizer after the fact, and now can't even see it.
Yeah, so we took a lot of rock and coral from the local fish stores, and there's just no chance, man, in that environment that it hasn't been exposed to ick.
Yeah, that goes back to that. Unless we were to quarantine every piece of that live rock and every piece of that coral, and then
But in a fish store environment where there's constant fish going in and out, in a live rock where you can't use copper or you'll kill everything beneficial on the live rock, it's not a sentence that anybody wants to hear, that certainly the fish stores don't want to say out loud or hear, but it's true, man. It's just probably there. And so we can choose to ignore that fact and pretend it's not real, or we can embrace the fact that there is going to be fish parasites in this tank. And in this one here, put the UV on. Well, they're still in there. They're just not killing anything.
Yeah.
And visually, you can't see it anywhere because the populations are so low.
Yeah. You just said it. Embrace that the parasites and disease are going to be in the tank. That's our core belief.
Boom.
Next one that we believe matters most when it comes to UV sterilizers, and are they worth the time, money, and effort? UV installed wrong is low value, almost just a brick. And we're talking like flow rates and to some degree the plumbing, right? Feeding it, recirculating just the sump and not the display. But flow rates is like that key point.
Yeah, so you need to, I won't want to harp on this too long because you guys have probably all heard this before, but there's a specific flow rate and exposure time to the UV that you...
To sterilize.
To sterilize it. And with, at least with the Emperor Aquatic ones, most of them are rated for parasites to turn the water over about once an hour.
It's very slow.
So it's a combination of two things. Like with something that replicates in a matter of days to weeks, I don't actually need to turn over the water like 80 times an hour to be effective. Getting most of the water through the UV once an hour is adequate solution to keeping very few parasites in the free flowing water.
Yeah.
But what I do need is to make sure that I have the right contact time. So with the UV dose. So what happens if it goes too fast?
Right, then they don't get sterilized on the way through. And and if it goes too slow, then you run the risk of not processing enough of the water, so you don't get them all, right?
It's kind of like sun tanning. If I went out and hung out in the sun for 3 minutes, I'm probably not going to get much of a tan. You have to build the job to the application.
Yeah.
So in this case, make sure you do the flow rate right. You can do an elaborate system like getting a flow meter from an Apex or something. I mean, if you have an Apex and a UV, for God's sake, get the flow meter. You'll be so much happier, right? But if you don't own the Apex already, then don't. But it's as easy as draining some water out of the tank, or just below, push a ice cream bucket or something, or a 1 gallon bucket below the water surface wherever the return is, and turn it on and count how long it takes to fill a gallon of water. From there, you can calculate how many gallons an hour it is. It's not that hard to do.
Yeah, and companies like Pentair, the professional tools of the world, have those specific flow rates just written there, and all you have to do is follow it.
Yeah. And some people are like, oh, I don't want to do that. That bucket method sounds like whatever. Like, no, but like embrace the fact there's disease in there, and you want to do something about it and care for the pets. This is actually a really simple thing for that.
If you do it wrong, then you're basically just bought yourself a very expensive paperweight.
You challenged me earlier today. Like, is there a different method of flow meter that we could discuss? I talked about that with Dave too. And I don't know. I'm gonna go look and see if there is like a non-Apex flow meter that's like really easy to install. I don't know if there is for a non-Apex. I'll be honest, it'll probably be $200, and then you'll wonder why you didn't just buy the Apex.
It's probably a specific tool for some of the plumbing industry.
But you can do it manually, and if you don't want to do it manually, there are the automated options. But installing it wrong. Also, the other piece that he said is a lot of people, because it's easy, I just want to plumb some water out of the sump and have it go through back into the sump rather than go through my returns. This is like a retrofit install, right? This is somebody who wants to install it after the fact. They don't want to cut apart their plumbing. Is that better than nothing?
Yeah.
Probably. Is it going to do what you want it to do? Probably not, because you're actually just kind of recycling the same water inside of the sump. Whereas
the sump only turns, in most cases, over 3 to 5 times an hour.
Yeah, you're going to be recirculating the same water over and over again, which means I'm not going to get most of the tank water through the thing every hour. I'm just going to get most of the sump water through every hour, which is going to recirculate itself. Is there a way to do it that way? Maybe. But even in the sump, you have problems that some of those parasites are going to get caught up in the filter socks and stuff, and that's where they may hatch. You're like, I would do it right. And which is right means either a closed loop in the tank itself or probably through one of the returns, which is by far the most common, is have the water from your return go through it. Don't have the water from your overflow go through it, because you'll have air bubbles in there. It'll be another total mess. But we'll explain that. Actually, I talked to Dave today, and I think we're going to do a video actually on how to install a UV end to end, all of the little nitty gritty details. So that'll come up at some point. All right, next one.
We also believe that matters most is that the sizing matters, the size that you get, and there's a difference between large utility made for the industry, professional grade ones, and toys. So size, if you go look at any of the Pentaires that we opened before, these things are bulky. Yeah, they're either super long or they're really big and wide, but on purpose, because there's a lot of, for sizing up to 500 gallons, 600 gallons, you either need a lot of contact time in length or a lot of contact time in volume, but it comes down to, like, if you don't have if you don't have the right contact time, then it's just not working.
So there's a balance of cost and what's realistic as well here, right?
Yeah.
And that there might be diminishing returns in one direction or another, but I'd say there's 3 categories. There's toys that you should just avoid. These are tiny little things that are super duper cheap,
twisty loopy deals.
They get gimmickies on them. It's funny because you see this they have little twirlies in them, and and it's supposedly like, well, yeah, you're gonna get more contact time. Like, no, if I put 100 gallons an hour through a pipe and pump it in, and I pump out 100 gallons an hour, the twirly didn't make it go any faster or increase contact time. It's just a gimmick. And maybe the twirly does something different, who knows, but I've never talked to anybody who believes in that. So here's the second piece is then there's the other extreme end, the Pentaires of the world. This is the commercial application. This is what the zoos use. This is what aquaculture uses. This is what a lot of many stores use.
Freshwater applications, tons of them.
This is when, having it work is mission critical, and if it doesn't work, unacceptable. And these businesses thrive on it needs the highest percentage result possible. And there's a reason why that Pentair thing is really big, and it's going to be kind of hard to fit inside of many stands. And sometimes the high output ones that are a little bit more compact are better. But you can also run 2, by the way. So if I needed 50 watts, I could get 220 watts or 225 watts and kind of run them in series.
Which are going to be smaller, yeah.
Yeah, they'll be smaller. There's different ways to do it, but that is the other extreme end, which is it absolutely has to work. Otherwise, everything in my aquaculture facility is going to die, right? And then the business goes under as well.
And you can't have people visit in a Sea Worlds of the world or aquariums of the world and see just sick fish.
No,
yeah,
that's not acceptable.
It's got to be
okay, then there's the middle ground, which I would call the aqua UVs, right? So the aqua UV is not as big around as the
Pentairs. Yeah.
It's also not a twirly, twisty tool. And the reality is the contact time won't be the same in many cases on this. They're even rated a little differently. You can see they're not as aggressively rated when you look into the UV dose and time and stuff.
Yeah.
But they're actually significantly cheaper, and they're significantly smaller as well.
Yeah.
One of the ones I would suggest is, in many tanks, is consider the 57 watt, which is a compact higher output form factor. That thing is actually going to fit under the stand in most instances.
It's in our 750X XL. That's about the only one we could fit in there because everything is so already just jam-packed in there. But
yeah, and so sometimes you got to deal with the dose of reality. I just avoid the toys. If I could fit it, I'd fit the commercial ones. But like, if that isn't true and I'm dealing with a dose of reality and I still want to protect my pets, the aqua UV is definitely the answer.
Yeah. We also believe matters most. Good nutrition may help, but poor nutrition absolutely hurts. There was this probably, I wonder if this sparked that garlic conversation of curing ick and stuff down the road, where rather than the garlic, the byproduct of just a healthy appetite and healthy food and, proteins and fats and, for your herbivorous fish, feeding them a proper varied diet and all this other stuff was actually the leading culprit to keeping some of that ick and parasites and stuff down versus the whole garlic notion. So, if you have a poor appetite, if you have a poor diet and poor appetite, and you're not really considering the full nutritional array of your food to your fish, it actually does more worse than good when it comes to management.
So this is my pool of people on garlic. There's no answer 100% right now. Probably never will be. Garlic is, to me, is a product of if enough people say it at the right time, it must be the solution. In reefing, plausible theory with enough people actually turns into fact somehow.
Yeah.
And I don't know many people that believe that garlic actually prevents ick in any manner. Some people do believe that if the garlic helps make them eat, well then of course, an animal getting proper nutrition will do better than one that isn't. So if you put garlic on there and it causes them to eat and they wouldn't eat before, then yeah, absolutely.
There you go.
I've actually seen some reports where the garlic actually damages the organs of some fish. So over a prolonged period of time. So I
don't know what the daily allowance for garlic is in a fish or what it is for humans, but
I will tell you what, I wouldn't use it.
Yeah.
I've never used garlic. I probably wouldn't. But nutrition, actually, like if you think about nutrition as a holistic approach, as to, like the anthias, this is an organism that eats all day long. Am I feeding it the calanus 4 times a day? Have I figured out an auto feeder for it? Because fish don't just die. They die either because of stress, husbandry, poor water quality, or nutrition. I guess old age you can throw in there too, but, and parasites, I guess as well. So if you can, solve most of that stuff, and this hits that piece about, we're borrowing a book heavily here from Humble Fish because when I read that article, it spoke to me. It was like, finally somebody that's brave enough to come out and really say, there are 2 paths in here. There's the just I'm not looking and roll the dice and hoping for the best. But there's also the management solution, and there's also eradication, and there are steps on a journey here.
Yeah.
So basically what he said, I'm paraphrasing, you should go read the article, but it's the UV, get the biggest, baddest one you can because it will keep the population of parasites down. Good nutrition will help the animals fend it off just through a normal immune system. And think about husbandry. And you're going to hear a couple of these other pieces about husbandry here in just a second. But the next one that I have here is stressed fish are often patient zero.
Gosh.
Right.
I've been a victim of this before, or not, maybe not a victim, but so you bring in, this is what happened to me. My 125, I had fish in there. I had powder browns, ick magnets. I had a powder blue ick magnet and a whole bunch of other tangs and whatnot. And I was just on this tang kick. So I went to the fish store and I got, I saw this gorgeous clown tang. Just zipping through and all over the place. And I was like, man, that guy looks great. And bringing him into the new environment in my tank and all of the other tangs kind of checking him out and picking on him, stressed him out. He got covered in ick. Next thing I know, all of my fish gone. Ick covered and dead.
Yep. So it's a good chance that non-stressed fish would have overcome the ick because it's probably already in the tank. And if he wasn't getting attacked and stressed out, then you know what?
Could have got over it.
You probably could have gone over
Yeah.
it. There's a really good chance anyway. Or if you were using UV and you were managing all these other things. So stressed fish are often patient zero. So think of this as like contagion or zombies.
You look at your tank and like, oh, that one's got it, but nobody else does. So the rest of them got to be okay. And then all of a sudden,
no, as soon as it overwhelms that one, man, they're all going to go looking for something else.
Spreading the zombie disease.
Start spreading. So thinking about stress, and that was part of the thing that we talked about with the habitat and the aquascapes and stuff is, if we have a place to, for all the fish to go and be away from aggression really easy, and there's double the amount of locations than actually is required. I don't have 20 locations for 20 fish.
Yeah.
I have 40 locations for 20 fish. The chances are that he's probably not going to get harassed. Way lower chances that he's going to get stressed out, have disease overcome him, and then have the disease overcome the whole tank.
Patient zero.
Okay, and also, just like what you described, a single stress event can push the balance in the wrong direction. And so I think this is before your time. It was right about when we were launching the 160 here. We had some Achilles tangs in a frag system that were here. It was a big mammoth system, like 8 feet long, that we were watching before we put them in this tank. And at that point in time, we felt like visual quarantine was a real thing.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, it's not a thing, but it only does so much. This is a good example because actually the Achilles was doing really, really well in there, and a bunch of other fish as well. And then something happened, and it triggered the breaker box. And over the weekend, the power went off to just the heaters. Okay, so the temperature of the tank fell to about 72 degrees. From 78. When we came back on Monday, the Achilles had ick, and then within a matter of days, it started to spread everywhere, and then everybody was dying. And when I say ick, it could have been velvet too. These things look similar to the average eye, and that was 8 years ago, so I don't know.
Well, you said a single stress event. So I've heard
it.
It
It's just a temperature.
Oh,
the heater dies, and all of a sudden everything goes out.
That's one of the most popular ones for the stressor events is either tank getting cold or tank overheating. But stress event in maybe the flow gets turned off for a little while. Maybe the power went out for a little while. You did your best. Everybody survived, but guess what? The power comes back on. It's not just heat related. There's so many different stressors. You left your lights on all night long, and some fish get stressed out over stuff like that. Even adding new fish or changing aquascape or habitat or something that they've been used to, and those changes, stress event, trigger the disease and parasite, wipe out.
I got news for you. you're going to encounter multiple stress events.
Just happens.
The heater's going to break.
Yeah,
pH is going to be an issue one day. You're going to leave the lights on for 3 days by accident.
Dose for 2 days straight accidentally.
There will be many stress events along the way. You'll do a water change that wasn't heated or was too big. You know, there will be something that happens in this. You'll add some fish that are mean to each other, cause one. It's going to happen. That's why we consider what do we do about it and how do we manage to the fact. Like, it's that piece that we asked or we talked about earlier. It's like the people that accept the inevitable and manage to it are just way more successful than the people that assume won't happen to me.
Yeah, because it's going to happen to you.
Yeah.
This next one too, we believe matters most is that skip the ick magnets. Just avoid them. The thin mucus coats, tangs, you always hear like the powder browns, the powder blues, and the Achilles, and a variety of other tangs are the most susceptible to things like ick and disease and stress events and things like that. So you can just choose to avoid it altogether. Yeah,
I asked, I've talked about this one with Elliot and marine collectors quite a bit, and I'm not going to quote him correctly here, so I'm not putting words in his mouth. But, he's uncomfortable about getting fish out to people like Achilles because you think just because you got it quarantined that you can put it in your tank and because that fish isn't sick that it won't become an ick magnet. No. If any of the other things you've done is introduced ick, now that ick will get onto the Achilles tang, it'll become patient zero in a single stress event, right? The stress event might be adding the fish, and so if you think about it entirely, then you start thinking about all of the coral introductions and the snails and whatever. It's like, dude, you're basically just putting an ick battery in the tank. Don't do it. And I'm like, well, that's so sad because I really would like
a whole lot of fish that are not available to me anymore.
Okay, you know what though? This is the part that came to me in the end is I'm unwilling to do the elaborate, quarantine every last snail frag forever. I'll mess that up somewhere in the middle, so it just kind of becomes not a good point. What I am willing to do though is I am willing to quarantine or buy fish from a quarantine source in a fish-only system. And if I bought in a fish-only tank, that's filled with a school of Achilles or something like that, in that system, as long as we quarantine them all going in there first, I don't have this series of other things that are going in there forever, and now I can successfully house those fish without those concerns. So if some of those fishes are really, really near and dear to your heart, there are ways to do it without adding the ick magnet to your tank. So, really avoid all of those things in there. There's also a series of, you can look at it this way, all the tangs have a thinner mucus coat, and they're often the first ones to go. But like a yellow tang or a purple tang,
pretty hardy.
Less so than the other ones.
Yep.
A purple or a hippo tang, more susceptible for sure. But the Achilles tangs, the powder blues, the powder browns and stuff of the world, those things are the most commonly susceptible to these types of diseases. So, you might want to if you're just going to not listen to any of this, at least consider the roadmap. And then if you fail, don't be surprised because it's probably a low percentage outcome that you will succeed. And the worry it is then is all the people that raise their hand no, I did it. Yeah, you did, but there's the 90% of the hands that weren't shown. So it's helpful. It's hard, man, because it's helpful to show your successful paths. But one of the best things you can do is if you say that, hey, I did this path and it worked out for me, but I have to admit that I've also seen this gone wrong for more people than right. That is actually helpful. Or if your experience literally is I've seen this, I've never seen this be a problem for anybody, and I know 20 guys with tanks. I will share it, man. It's part of the conversation.
What we believe matters most. We've been talking about them this whole time. Humble fish. read Humblefish's article. It's got his own website. I think he has got his own website or forum also.
Humble.fish.
Yeah, humble.fish. There you go. But that one that really is that article that really spoke to us and really spoke to you and started leading this conversation was that ick eradication versus ick management.
Yeah. So pick a path. Close your eyes and hope it doesn't happen to you. Pick management, pick eradication. It'll actually give you a lot of tools on all of any one of those paths. And the reason that there's a lot of people out there that share information on this, and it's an imperfect science. It's like going to a doctor. If I went to a doctor with something, 3 of them would tell me slightly different variations.
Yeah, prescribe something different.
One of them's favorite thing is penicillin. The next one's amoxicillin. The next one's some other thing. So there isn't like an absolute truth in all of this. The reason that I like Humblefish's approach is he's considered multiple paths and he's not just hung up on only the eradication piece, although he knows it's the best and he wants to help people find that journey. And I'm reading into this, by the way, just from reading all the articles, the mentality that's behind it, so hopefully I'm getting it right. But when I read it, it also is written in a way that the average person could do this.
Yeah.
Right? And I'm actually seeing as the articles evolve, sometimes they were originally written with like, all right, so you want to treat, Brooke. Here's the 15 different ways to treat Brooke. You're like, I don't want to sort through all that garbage, man.
The 80%.
Like, how would you do it? I will go follow that.
Yeah, give me the 20% that gets me 80% of the way there.
If there is 15 ways, great. I'm glad you shared that knowledge, but also
Give me the 4 most successful.
just tell me the one way that you treat Brooke when you see it.
Yeah, what's
One way.
the first go-to?
And if that doesn't work, what would be the second?
Go to the next one.
Right? Be brave enough to share that. In my experience, this is the best, and that's what I'm seeing out of Humble.fish and the information he's sharing, and why I continually say, hey. What believe matters most is don't listen to Randy and Ryan on this one. Go check out his forum because he's really the source of knowledge on a lot of this to begin with. Some hard lessons in relation to UV and also just parasites.
And stuff that we learned from just testing it too. Hard lesson number 1 from UV sterilizers, are they worth the time and money? You can run 2, it's probably not needed. This is the setup of your 360. It's like, okay, well, there's 2 different flow rates for these pentairs. There's one for parasites and diseases, and there's one for like algae and protozoan algae or what have you. So the algae flow rate is higher, and the parasites and whatnot is lower. So, if my flow rate's set for fish and disease and management, then does that mean I'm not getting the algae benefit out of it? And if my thing's set for algae, am I not getting the parasite? So then the thought process is, well, what if you just set up 1 at each flow rate, and then you're just knocking it out? Two birds, 2 stones.
Yeah, so something like if you're going to try to treat for dinos, something that replicates, in maybe a matter of minutes to hours instead of days to weeks.
Faster flow rate.
I got to process that water way faster. Like to actually prevent the population from exploding, we need way more passes through the UV sterilizer for it to function. Also, something as simple as a dinospore just doesn't need the same contact time to be sterilized as an actual parasite. And this kind of gets into that conversation too, like will it kill your copepods and stuff? Like if you think of an ick parasite and the complexity of that organism versus something that has actual appendages and looks like a little shrimp walking around, it's not going to affect your ability to have copepods in your tank. It's targeting these tiny little microscopic creatures almost. So, I would say that I put 2 on my tank. I reset it up in my office, and I only put 1 this time.
What's more important is preventing or managing disease more important, or the algae or dino or whatever thing. And I think what the solution that we landed on that we told people was aim for the fish, aim for the lower flow rate, and if you run into some of those other problems, kick it up and to solve those problems.
So the nature of it is you'll buy the Pentair 50 watt UV, and it's rated for a 300 gallon. I'm making the number up. I'm not sure the exact gallons, but it's rated for a 300 gallon tank. Well, so in that spirit, you can run it at about 1 times turnover, and it is good, 300 gallons an hour for your 300 gallon tank. Or you can run it at 5 times or 6 times that, and now it's good for parasites that replicate multiple times in an hour and need to process the water roughly every 10 minutes or so, right?
Yeah.
Most of the water every 10 minutes. But it's the same UV. I don't have to change out UV sizes or anything. It's just the flow rate. So if you can get something like a flow meter, which makes it a lot easier, if I run into parasites, or if I run into dinos, if I run into bacterial blooms, all that kind of stuff, I can just speed it up temporarily to solve that problem. And once I've solved it, I can bring it back down to the fish level.
Yeah.
And it won't be probably totally ineffective on the parasites for the fish during that time. It just won't be very good.
Yeah, well, and if for me, the matters most is that I'm preventing the possibility of an ick outbreak. I wouldn't choose, me personally, I wouldn't choose a UV sterilizer to run it at the algae rate or whatever the faster rate is.
It's a tool.
Because we've seen it in the 750 where you hook it up for a day or two, problem's gone, and then you took it out. Well, if that's a short-lived amount of time, I can just turn up my flow for a day or two.
So infinite budget, infinite space, having one set up to run or manage bacterial blooms and stuff, sure. But in a real world where infinite budget, infinite space isn't usually the thing, in fact, in our case, I had 2 already. I just didn't have the space to install balls of foam.
True.
So I set it up to protect the fish that are in there because that's what matters most to me. And if I ever ran into an issue, but with an established tank, those issues are pretty rare. So I don't think I'm going to run into an issue where I need to change it. But if I did, I could. It's the same size. Another hard lesson. This one's going to be kind of hard to do for most people. But if you start a new tank, my belief is that a closed loop is probably best.
You don't have to worry about, it's got its own independent pump, which means I can adjust the flow rate.
Well, let's explain what a closed loop is just for a second.
Okay.
So instead of going through, having the water go over your overflow and go into, through the sump and then through the UV back up to the tank, which is technically a closed loop, right?
Right.
Closed loop, is put 2 drill holes in it, 1 input and 1 output on the back of the tank somewhere, maybe near the top, wherever you want it. And I'm only processing the water in the tank. Nothing's getting caught up in filter socks, nothing getting caught up in anything. Water, the only thing that's happening now is water is draining through that hole, going through the UV and going back out. I think that's probably best.
Well, your 90% of your water volume is in the display of the tank. So if you just want to filter the biggest body of water, only run it through the biggest body of water. Benefit is you have an independent pump, and now adjusting the flow rate doesn't mean I have to worry about adjusting the height in my sump or the pump chamber or my return pump. I don't have to worry about different flow. So you got 2 pumps that run each of the overflow. Maybe one has a UV sterilizer on it, but if my redundant pump, because I have a redundant pump system and my one with the UV sterilizer fails, well, then I haven't lost without a UV sterilizer.
So my biggest concern is that it requires, if you put in the sump, all the water is going to first go through a felt material or a filter sock in many cases. And a lot of times they'll actually get caught up in that. They'll settle out, they'll hatch and whatever. So I didn't get a chance to really sterilize it. I'm going to sterilize then after the fact the things that hatch out of there. Whereas if I'm processing just the water, I'm getting them, before they actually hatch. I'm getting them after they hatch. And I'm not saying that you have to do it that way. I'm just saying if I was planning a brand new tank, and especially if I was going to have ick magnets or expensive fish in here, and I was doing a custom tank, or even not a custom, I just want to, it's super easy to drill glass. I think I would try it, but I wouldn't feel bad about it if I just had to do it through the return.
Right, yeah. Hard lesson learned, this was an investigative test that we did, and that is about the flow rate. So did 2 different types of tests on this one. We put brand new dry rock with dry sand and a and 2 flow rates on the UV sterilizer. What we were trying to solve, algae versus that protozoan flow rate, and if those flow rates matter. So does the algae rated flow rate, the higher, faster flow rate, actually help prevent the algae? Or if I set it to the lower flow rate, will it have the same effect, but also, taking care of diseases and parasites and whatnot? And come to find out that the algae flow rate actually does help the algae. We had established dry rock that we put into a tank. It started growing ulva and algae, but the tank with the lower flow rate for ick and disease grew the algae faster. The tank with the algae flow rate actually grew it way slower, if not like almost slowed it or stopped it. It didn't stop it completely. It didn't eradicate the algae, but it definitely slowed the spread and the growth.
Right tool, right job. So if you tune the UV sterilizer to fight algae and parasites, it worked. Mm-hmm. Now, I will say that we found in the end that eventually, if you just let them all go, eventually they'll all come to the same place. Right. Like, it will take twice as long to get there if you're using the UV as if you didn't. But the part that doesn't incorporate is the fact that in a normal world, I'm doing maintenance. In a normal world, I got shrimp and crabs, and I got fish that are eating all that stuff. And so if I can reduce the chances of that by half for the length of time it gets there, the chances that I encounter this go way
right
down. So yeah, we found that flow rate absolutely matters, and just kind of matched what like the general, I guess commercial.
Just verified that,
knew.
Yeah.
Another hard lesson is bulb changes. So you need to either figure out how you're going to remove that whole thing, periodically once a year, or you need to figure out how you're going to be able to pull that tube out
double the
of
length.
the edge,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. So, one, you have to do the bulb changes. So after like a year or so, if you're going beyond a year, then it's not an effective tool. There's a certain percentage that they're rated for, I think, bulb life-wise.
The good ones are rated to be able to, like, basically at 70% bulb life, that will work, though, or 70% output reduction, which is the end of life for the bulb. The good ones are rated. I've been caught into that to begin with.
Yeah, but one of the hardest things is you have a UV sterilizer that's 4 feet long or 3.5 feet long or what have you, and now once you get once you get it up into your stand, or if you turn it straight up and down in your stand, how are you going to get that bulb out? Because it only comes out the one way through the top, and the bulb is just as long as the body. I can't get it straight out vertically and horizontally. You have to plan for it. But this was one in your plumbing that you and Jeremy had to plan for.
Well, so I've done this many times where I've installed the thing in a hard, difficult place to get to. Thing that I know full well when I remove it, some water is going to get on the floor. Not a lot, but enough. Mm-hmm. And then because of that, I never changed the damn bulb. Okay, so at my house, though, I installed the UV sterilizer on the floor, and we made sure that you could just pull it right out of the tube. I changed it, unscrew the thing. There's no water or anything. You just unscrew the top thing. It sits inside of a quartz tube. You pull it out, swap the bulb out, screw it back in. It was a 2-second thing, and like, I do this on time every time.
Yeah. If you can install it with the top up and have enough clearance, do it that way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And so, like, if you can install it in any direction in which that you can pull the tube out, do that. So think about the bulb changes when you're installing it. And it might just be, this is probably one of the hang-ups where people don't want to install UV, is because they can't figure out how to do it, that way. Mm-hmm. Sometimes behind the tank is the right solution. Come in and out and pull it out, especially if you already have an external overflow.
These next hard lessons, there's about 3 of them here, or 4 of them. There are 4 of them here. It's called the Just Do It section. And if you're wondering, should I get a UV or not, if you're on the fence, or when should you get one and when not, these next 4 hard lessons are just do it.
Yeah.
Starting with the first one, if dinos are making you pull your hair out and you're just tired of fighting them, feel like you're losing the battle, just get UV.
Just do it, man.
Just
UV
get one.
is probably the only solution you'll need in half the cases.
Yeah. And you can darken out the tank, 3-day dark outs, blanket it out, filter, sieves, all this other stuff. After repeated attempts, if it doesn't work, just go buy the UV sterilizer.
Specifically, if you're looking at it and you see sheets of dinos during the day, and at night they break up and you don't really see as much of that garbage in the tank, UV is your solution, almost certainly.
Because they're free floating at night,
Yep.
which means they're going to pass through the UV sterilizer at night.
So, and you don't need to install it permanent. You can choose to just hang it, get a hang-on one, or hang a pump over the edge of the tank, and just have it kind of be ugly for a couple of weeks while you solve this problem. But
You don't have to pull
you
your
don't
hair
have to
out.
permanently install it. So if dinos are making you pull out your hair, just do it. Another one, if you're going to do bare bottom, dry rock, meaning a sterile tank with no sand, just do it.
Yeah, the bacterial blooms, the ugly browns, the dinos, all of these things are because of we've had that biome conversation yesterday, and in a dry rock, bare bottom, sterile environment, the opportunity for one of the pests to overrun the system versus a healthy biome or whatever or bacterias chances are a lot higher. In which case, in the 750, we found that bacterial blooms were just constant. It just happened. But every time we put a UV sterilizer on, it was gone.
You never know the problem. So this is kind of seems like odds at each other. The problem is a sterile tank, and so you're going to add a sterilizer to it. And I can understand the mentality, but the reality is what we're dealing with here is we're preventing the least desirable organisms from taking over the tank, the photosynthetic ones. And so, adding a UV sterilizer to a sterile tank doesn't help it become less sterile, but what we're looking for is the things that grow on the surfaces of the rock in most cases. Those are the things that are going to prevent a lot of the pests, and those things aren't affected by the sterilizer. It will take a little bit longer to cycle the tank that way, maybe. In a material manner, almost certainly not. And will you avoid a lot of those pests that a lot of people run into? Absolutely. So bare bottom, dry rock tank, no sand, sterile, just do it. You will not regret putting the UV, installing it in there.
Another just do it hard lesson to get the UV sterilizer. If you're going to have expensive fish or a lot of fish, just buy the UV sterilizer, especially the expensive part. Like if the $500 UV sterilizer protects thousands of dollars in fish, that's worth it.
Let's call it the 10 or 20% rule.
Yeah.
Right. If the sterilizer costs 10% of the total cost of fish that's in there,
You should probably
it's
get
a
one.
super awesome insurance policy. I think that you could probably cut it all the way down to even 30% of the total fish in there, because Zeta's outbreak on a long enough timeline is really common.
Yeah.
So if you think about it that way, if you have really expensive fish and it's 2% of the cost of the fish, for God's sake, it is a total no-brainer at that point. Just do it. Okay, another one. If despite counsel otherwise, you're going to randy it and fill it with ick magnets. I'm sorry, I'm looking at your story
I will
earlier.
too.
Yeah.
Time and time again.
If you just I want a powder brown, powder blue,
My
hippo
favorite fish in
tangs.
the whole wide world,
Yeah.
powder brown.
I want Achilles. You can't stop me from doing it. I don't care about your crappy advice. You know what?
Just do it.
You just do it. Just put the UV sterilizer in
UV.
there. You will dramatically reduce the chances or increase the percentage paths to success here. If you're going to not listen to that counsel, for God's sake, just put the UV in there. All right.
We also hard lessons that matter is this one becoming more popular too. Where you buy your fish from it matters. I mean, I've seen it all from not to harp on the big box stores, but like the Petco. I would go into Petco to find sick fish to buy, just because they're discounted. And there's something about trying to revive or rescue those types of fish and expand my knowledge in the QT and medication. But there's places out there where you could buy that like do this for you. Spend some more money.
If cheap is the only thing, man, that was definitely the right direction.
Yeah,
you know,
that was my direction.
that's actually where we got Fang and Sir Chomps a lot for the original How to Start a Saltwater Aquarium.
Cheap as you could go.
I just needed some fish now. I was on my way to work, you know, and so, but it does matter. So where you buy your fish from matters. It's the same thing of where you get your cat or your dog from. It matters.
Yeah.
There's a crappy place to get it from, and there's a good place, and there's various degrees in between.
Sometimes you might get lucky, and sometimes you won't.
I would just say if cheap is the only thing that matters, then there's lots of options for
A lot of
that.
options.
There's no, that's just dictated by a price tag.
Yeah.
There's no, that one's the easiest one to obtain. The rest of it is actually just going to be mostly trust, you know, because you're going to have to trust that this person is good at, you know, husbandry, selection, and getting you a healthy pet. And here's the reality of it is, as I've seen this go down, like people go buy a $200 fish that has been quarantined that otherwise would have cost $80, and then that fish, you know, they put it in the tank and it looks like it gave the whole fish, you know, tank ick or whatever. Like, oh, that didn't work out. Blah blah blah. Well, it might be that that person just doesn't do it very well. But also, it might very well be that you already had ick in the tank. And it was a stressed fish that you put a brand new fish in, and it got ick from the tank because it already had it, you know, because you didn't do this to begin with and all of it. So you have to be kind of careful, like just because you ever got disease from, you know, some place you buy fish from doesn't mean they're bad. It means that you might have been bad about it beforehand, right?
There are, it's sad to say, but there are, you know, fish stores or online places that will just sell you anything that you want to point your finger at just because of a dollar.
Okay, I don't know how to say it any other way. If this paying a lot for it will not guarantee that you've got a healthy animal. It won't, because the person might do it. They might put a lot of work into it, and they might do it poorly. So it's all about trust. It's all about trying to figure out somebody that you believe has you and your tank's best interest, and as a person or an organization is thinking about you and helping you be successful. You know, the other direction is, I guess,
Detrimental to a hobby.
I don't know, man.
Yeah.
You're just going to have to figure it out on your own. But where you buy these things from absolutely matters, and it's mostly just about trust. I will tell you the other direction is that if it's the cheapest possible place to buy the pet, it isn't the best place to buy a pet.
Yeah.
Unless you want to be your own veterinarian. The next piece.
This is a good conversation sparker here. QT, hard lesson. QT is an unpoliced, non-descriptive term. Being cheapest is its own tell. So you go poll the forum, one of the forum groups, or on the Facebook groups, or any of these other things, and just get an idea of, all right, what does QT mean to you? Is it visual QT, because we thought that was a thing at one point in time, just watching? Is it actually medication? Is it tank-to-tank transfer? Is it the healthy diet portion? Is it the UV portion? So I might go to a fish store or a place online or somebody's house and say, yeah, I QT. And maybe the QT definition to them is, I set it in a tank, washed it for 2 weeks, it looks like it's eating, and there's no diseases on it, so it's been QT'd. And then there's the opposite. There's you go in even steps further and saying, yes, I QT, and I have racks of different days and times written on there when the fish go in, when the fish come out, and it's all medicated. Then they go to another place, and they go to another place, and they work through this, and then there's a tank to, like, there's, the QT is, there is no definition of it, and nobody's coming up with a universally agreed upon definition.
Here's the hard truth of the matter, as knowing the behind scenes a little bit here, is proper QT means I'm going to hold this fish for a prolonged period of time.
It's a money
it's
suck.
not a week, 2 weeks, whereas the other one might only be here for days, which means to do this, at the same level of profitability, like, that person has to be willing to have a facility that is 3 to 5 times bigger than the facility that's required just to turn and burn them.
Oh yeah.
Right? So if they have a 50,000 foot facility for turning and burning, then the proper one would probably have to be 250,000 square feet. Right?
Jeez.
There's a lot of cost that goes into doing this right. And I've never seen it in industry, in pets, anywhere where the biggest ones do it the best. They almost always do it the cheapest, but they don't do it the best. Right? And so I don't know, man. You're going to have to decide for yourselves, what level of QT. Zero QT, which is magic fairy tale. It says we QT here, but doesn't give any description as to what or how. And if they are doing it right and they're putting a lot of effort into it,
They want
it
to
is
share.
a major selling point, and it costs them a lot to do. They will share the details of how they do it. If it's just as we QT stuff here, I don't know. And it's the cheapest, then almost certainly no.
Yeah.
Right. So, I think those are for the people that are looking for those avenues. You can go out and see, how to find, what you're looking for from that. Because there's probably a matrix of Elliot at Marine Collector is going to hold the thing, until it's absolutely healthy to the best of every known abilities and spend all the time hunting the thing down. But also the $50 fish may very well cost $180, man, and you may not want that level of security, right?
Yeah.
There's just a matrix in there. Some people will, some people won't. But note that just because it says QT means you should ask a question of what does QT mean to you,
Yeah.
right? Okay, so what's next?
We are on episode 15 of the 52 Weeks of Reefing. This one is called Adding Saltwater Fish Intelligently and Safely. We did talk about UV sterilizers in the previous one, so they're in some ick management and ick eradication. There might be some pour over into this one too, but adding saltwater fish intelligently and safely, core belief.
More to this than you think, actually.
Yeah.
So, all right, so I don't know, I think probably in week 15 we said acclimate your fish or something like that. I don't know. I don't remember exactly what we said back then, but there's a lot more to it nowadays. Core belief here is fish adapt to most environments, but are also sensitive creatures, and so they do so best when done gradually, right? And this means more than just your drip application. And your drip acclimation is actually the bad way in most cases. So fish adapt to most environments, meaning these things will adapt to a wide array of environments.
Different salinities, different alkalinities, different pHs, yes.
Nutrient levels, water qualities, all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
But they're also sensitive creatures. And they do so, they do adapt to those environments best when it's done gradually.
Okay.
All right, so what matters most?
First thing that matters most that we believe is that temperature and pH matter most when we're talking about acclimation. Salinity, if it's way off, can cause osmotic shock if you're going from like 1.021 or 1.022 to 1.027 or 1.026. It's pretty wide. But if I'm going from like 1.023 to 1.025, less of a dramatic difference and probably less of a concern. But temperature and pH, the most.
So if the temperature and pH of your tank is the same as what's in the bag, you probably don't even need to bother with
like drip and all this other stuff.
You can put the fish in. If the temperature or pH is way off, or the salinity is way off, causing the osmotic shock, then some type of acclimation is necessary. But temperature and pH matter most.
Next one, what we believe matters most: never use the water from the bag. Couple reasons. Some places will put that ammonia detoxifier or something in the water, or you might have water from a system that maybe they pull it from the copper treatment system
always.
And put it right in the bag and use the copper treated water. Well, now you're going to dump that in your tank. Copper and corals don't mix.
So in fact, what I've been told, it's not so much that they need copper or water in the transport bag. It's that it's just cheaper and easier to scoop out the fish and the water out of the tank at the same time. than it is to go get them a new batch of water that doesn't have
Then
copper.
acclimate them to the new batch of shipping water, and then ship them in the new water and send it. Yeah, yeah.
So the best places will do that. The best places will move them from the medicated water to new salt water and put ammonia detoxifier in there to not have the ammonia become toxic in transport. But the ammonia detoxifier can't be used with copper in most cases, so you can't do that. And also, another reason that you see the copper water in that bag is because that's the primary method of water changes for big facilities. So
copper-laden water. Yeah.
Well, no, I put a gallon, or I put a half a gallon of water in the bag with the fish. I take it out and I ship it out. Now today I'll have to replace half a gallon of water for that fish.
Yeah.
So the primary way to keep water clean is actually pulling system water out.
Yeah.
If they didn't do that, then they would have to go create more salt water.
And then,
So never use the water from the bag. The bag could have disease in it. The bag could have, most cases is going to have some kind of medication in it. So, never ever, just don't bother even asking. Just don't use water in the bag.
We also believe matters most is that consider an in-tank acclimation box, pain in the corner. I think that pain in the corner is from Elliot, is of Elliot's approach. So the acclimation box, I mean, you have acclimation pre-made ones. eShops has some, a bunch of, there's a few other brands out there that have some. And you can get varying sizes and things like that. You took it a different path, and you actually just took some acrylic and made your own, which was the height of the tank. It allowed you to put some aquascape in there and things, but also allowed for a little more swimming room for the acclimation box. Elliot was telling us what he does is he'll take a sheet of acrylic and just section off like a quarter side of the tank. So he'll put the new fish addition on one side in the small little chamber, and for about a week or so, I think he said a week or two. Then he'll take a fish that might be aggressive or he's worried about, flip-flop the new addition in the existing one. So now the old guy that's been living on the block for a long time is quarantined in this little corridor section, while the other one gets to free roam, and then remove the acrylic paint and allow them to be together.
Probably the easiest way to do that is just get an acrylic paint that goes into the corner. It creates like a little triangle, essentially. Maybe you could use your magnet algae holder to hold it in place or something. But for me, I just went to Home Depot and chopped up some acrylic. I don't even think you need a saw. I think you could just use a score it and snap it, and then use super glue.
This stuff doesn't have to be leak free. It's sitting in water, so it doesn't matter if there's a little gap or something here.
Yeah, I don't even need fancy. Thin stuff will be just fine as well. And so the reason I did it is I put some pretty expensive fish in there that were really, really tiny, and I just didn't want them to get bothered or eaten. And here's the deal: is once I put them in there and I let them live inside that thing for, in some cases it was like more than a month until they got bigger. Then when I removed it, like the other fish couldn't care less about those two fish.
Right.
Like they were old news. They were all companions for a long time.
You guys have been here forever.
Yeah, and so building a little box for them. The problem with some of those acclimation box that you can buy is they're magnets. So if anybody bumps one of those magnets, now they're free. They're also kind of small in many cases. But like if I had if I wanted to add another tang to the tank, if my options were build a special box, cordon it off in the corner, or just throw it in, I would even use one of the little eShop ones and at least let them live in there for a day or two while everybody kind of got used to each other, so there wasn't just an immediate time bomb. But like building your own box may be the best thing because you can actually house them in there. But the cordon them off, the part that Elliot surprised me with was, of course you would cordon off the new one. It's really easy to put the new fish in there. Yeah. But the fact that he would swap them out and try to catch the others, so if I put a yellow tang in, but I also had a purple tang already in there, then try to swap it out and cordon the purple tang in there for a week while the yellow tang now gets
a free roam.
Yeah. That's pretty smart, man. Yeah. And actually, if you use those big sheets of plastic, you can actually
catch. You can catch them pretty quick. Yeah, corral
them into there. Like if you put it kind of out and drop food into there, then you just kind of close it off.
Yep.
So yeah, consider like a big acclimation box if you're, especially if you're going to add things you don't think is going to go well.
Yeah, tangs being probably one of the biggest culprits there.
I would do that. I enjoyed the project actually,
Yeah.
and then I built even a little mini aquascape to put in there. I thought the project was fun.
We also believe matters most is that an acclimation box can damage the fish. You think about those acclimation boxes that just have like Swiss cheese drilled holes in there. You know the painstaking process it would take to go through and soften every single edge around every single circle inside of that box, all on all sides. So Elliot was telling us, he goes, a lot of those boxes, you know, they flash up against them or they're reaching for food and then, you know, get their lips inside of some of those holes, can get themselves cut up and scarred up and stuff. He says, you know, they can actually harm the fish or damage the fish.
Yeah, so all the little sharp edges on the holes in the acclimation box, as one of them's trying to get out or one of them's trying to get in, it can damage their face, it can damage their eyes and give them infections. So, you know, one of the things that I don't think is that big of a deal is if you just took like a piece of sandpaper and rounded off the edges a little bit, but any care you could get to make sure they're not sharp edges in there. I also killed a purple tang this way, which is I had a acclimation box that I had built, and for whatever reason, like it came away from the glass a little bit and opened up like maybe a 3/8 inch sliver, and
tried to go through.
Yeah, of course, the purple tang wedged himself in there, and it literally happened while I was talking to Elliot. I was on the phone talking to him about some other stuff with the fish, and then when I looked around, I just turned around and said, F. Yeah, I mean, like, I saw him wedged in there, and he was already, like, you know, it was only a matter of minutes, man. And he ultimately died because of that. So, you know, you got to be careful about those things. The acclimation box needs to be safe for the fish as well, so consider all the ways that could go wrong. Also, what matters most is if you're going to do more fish at once, more is often best. One is just a target.
Oh, yeah.
So if you're going to add, like, say I got a purple tang and I want to add a yellow tang and like a bunch of other things in there, or a whole school of tangs or something, often adding 3 in at once will actually reduce the aggression, because they won't really, the aggression kind of gets split up amongst everyone.
Don't know which one to attack. There's 3 of them now, 3 brand new strangers. So the chances that one is just going to get picked on 3 times is less.
It's like, think about it like a sheepdog and a single rogue sheep.
Yeah.
Well, that's going to get 100% of the attention by that dog. If you let 6 sheep go, they're all going to get just a little enough attention to know who's boss here, but nobody's going to get totally picked on, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, it goes kind of like you wouldn't think more is better in many cases, but I found this to be true with a lot of things. If you got 2 of something, they often will pick on each other. If you have 8 of something, they don't care about each other. And you know, it depends on the thing you're talking about, but in most cases, and if you're going to disperse it, it doesn't actually have to be 3 yellow tangs. You could add a wrasse, a yellow tang, and some other things in there all at once. And it won't be as good, but it'll be better than if you added it all by
itself. I've seen 6-line wrasses go after all types of species of fish. Doesn't matter what they are, if it look the same or not. A lot of times you'll see like a zebrasoma tang will go after a zebrasoma, and you know, an acanthrus will go after an acanthrus, and what have you. But you know, when it comes to like the little wrasses or the mean little guys in the world, orchid dottybacks are one that were always mean for me too. Yeah, so adding like, if I want to add a clownfish, add 2. Instead of just 1 or what have you.
Yeah, interesting. All right, next one.
Stocking list or plan, and pick an order. It matters most. Like, come up with a stocking list or a plan to stock, and then pick an order in which they go in. And a lot of times this is like the aggression-based and like the territorial-based thing. And it's kind of one of those like reef safe with caution. Some people might say like, you should add in your clownfish maybe last, or because they can get aggressive once they establish their territory towards any other fish that gets in. But I made a stocking list based off of those recommendations online of you know, reef safe with caution, and all this, and then pick the ones that still fit the bill that would fit in my tank. But I didn't give any thought as to, all right, which one should go in first.
So there is definitely a pattern of what, and it's all going to depend on your fish. So there's no real rules of thumb per se on a lot of stuff, other than some of these things are at odds with each other. So I like to add the tangs at first, so they eat all the algae.
Yeah, utilitarian.
But it may not be the best path. So I would, reach out in many cases to the place that you're buying the fish from. Say, hey, this is the list of fish I'm thinking about. What order do you think I should add them in?
Mm-hmm.
And it might be a good way to find out whether or not you're buying it from somebody or anywhere good, if they care at all. But yeah, I will tell you, this was a rule that I learned on my first tank, and I was told this: build a stocking plan. You can only sit so many fish in there, so think about the ones you really care about and get them up front, and get the list. So I built out the list, and it's funny. I took it too literal. I ordered actually from MarineDepotLive.com.
Oh, yeah.
There was a live version of their site a long time ago. Instead of sending me a Randall's goby, they sent me a Rainford's goby. That wasn't on my list, so I took it to the fish store and said, "Hey, will you guys take this? I don't want it in my tank." And they looked at me like I was high. Why would you? I mean, it's because for those of you who don't know, a Rainford's goby is just a tiny little goby that eats filamentous, algae, and would have just been fine with it. There was no reason it could have not also been in this edition. And it's also a cool fish. Mm-hmm. So, but I took it literal. Like, I'm going to stick to my plan. And to the point where I went and released it back to the fish store. They gave me a tiny credit for it. Yeah, I would have a plan of where you're going. And if you have a plan where you're going, you'll probably get there better than if you don't. All right, next one.
We believe matters most. I think the second part doesn't apply here, but shut the lights off. There's a lot of light happening back here, and if we were to add a new fish into this tank, it's like a new character in the play coming into the scene and covered in light and spotlight hits them. I mean, it's insta target for a lot of them. So you can shut the lights off and let them sort it out.
So I asked Elliot this one. I was like, "Do you think it's wise to tell people to turn the lights off, when they're going to add fish?" Something that I've always been told. It decreases aggression, kind of causes everybody to kind of go to their homes and stuff. And he said, if you get it from the fish store and you're going to bring it home and let it go inside of an hour, maybe. But if it's been thrown around in a FedEx truck for the last 24 hours, and it's been jostled, and it's in kind of toxic water, and it's stressed out to all hell, absolutely.
Shut the lights off.
Shut the lights off. And
give it some rest.
It wants some rest, and as much time to manage that as humanly possible. So shut off the lights when you add the fish. Also, turn off high-powered pumps is also something that matters a lot when you're adding a fish. So, just an immense amount of turbulence is not good for a fish that's really stressed out and doesn't know where to go and doesn't know where the safe spots are, and may not know how dangerous your Vortec or Tunes pump or whatever really is.
I've had this happen. Now, thinking back multiple times, adding a fish, not doing anything about the pumps, and hours later, they're sucked up against the Vortec.
Stuck to the pump, yeah.
Obviously didn't know that was a place that you don't want to be. They've probably never been exposed to that type of environment before, where if I come around here, the flow hitting me is a little less, so it feels a little safer, and the next thing you know, it's like a magnet. It just sucks them right in.
People will say they're fish killers. I will say they're a stressed fish that was probably largely kind of floating around anyway.
Yeah. Because a lot of times, a healthy fish would be able to swim out from that under their own power.
Yeah. So turn off the high-powered pumps. The other part that will do is it'll kind of throw off the other tank inhabitants, what's going on here. And it just changes things up in a way that causes them to not go after the other fish quite as much in many cases. Another one is, these are all designed to be 80-20 rules here. Nothing is 100%. You're just increasing the odds and chances of success. But well-fed fish may be less likely to fight over food or any other aggression. Hungry things tend to be more irritable. I think that's probably true.
That's that Snickers hangry type. All those commercials. Same thing with fish.
Yeah, so well-fed fish are less likely to fight. So now is not time to starve them.
Well, no, and you could even take that to the next level. When you're introducing a fish, feed just before or right. I mean, a lot of people want to see that the fish are eating anyway, so you can save a feeding for when the fish first hits the tank, and now there's an abundance of food, so everybody's kind of focused on the food floating around. Maybe it's get an extra algae clip or 2 extra algae clips and put them on different areas of the glass so that I'm distracting my tang that is I already know he's going to go inspect the new addition and maybe attack it if it's another tang. How about I distract you with algae over there or algae over here and start eating, and I'm less likely to look over at the other guy and get mad at him.
Fighting over food is a common behavior for all organisms on the planet. All right, another one, what matters most is plan to watch the tank for an hour or so, only looking for catastrophes. Odd behavior is normal. So when you put the fish in, spend the next hour, play some Candy Crush or whatever you gotta do, stare at the thing, and just make sure that nothing is absolutely terrible going on. And yes, there will be some aggression. You don't go in there and try to fight it up. They're gonna have to figure this out unless one's literally ripping the other one's fins off. And making sure that it's not getting stuck to pumps, making sure that nothing terrible is happening. Be aware though that they may not eat for days, and it's not great, but it's also not bad. And then the bad part is usually what happens is if oh my God, he hasn't eaten 2 days, let's capture him, let's move him to another tank, let's do this other thing. Yeah. And you're actually just making the problem worse.
Stressing. Yeah. Elliot said we had him on the phone. We were talking about this one, and he said. If I had it my way, I'd tell people, or I'd have people put the fish in the tank and then come back in a few hours. Don't even look at it. 2 days. Yeah. Come back in 2 days and see what happened. Don't even look at it, because he said the natural instinct is for you to disrupt. If they're not getting along all hunky-dory, is to disrupt them and stress them out even further, and eventually they just succumb to stress.
What's interesting is when he said that, it's just leave it for 2 days and don't look at it. I'm that's the exact opposite of our watch it for an hour thing. Right? And that's so interesting. But after I processed this statement, I'm you know what? For the average reefer, that's listening to this advice, not pro level reefer who's done this 100 times.
Yeah.
The average reefer, the chances of you misreading stress and trying to do something about it, and doing something worse than just if you hadn't looked at it is actually pretty high.
Yeah, that's why he condoned it.
So I can actually understand where he's coming from on that. But I do think on the flip side, watching not for odd behavior, but for catastrophe. This one's literally going to kill the next one in the next couple of minutes if I don't do something about it.
Well, when you get to that point, that leads to the next thing we believe matters most. When you get to that point, if you do see this one's going to die in the next couple of minutes if I don't do anything, a lot of times stressed fish will just swim right into your. I haven't caught a fish that just swam right in, but they could be so stressed that this safe haven, they're so easy to catch, maybe they swim right in.
I have found once, I actually did an interesting thing. I wanted a purple tang in a tank where I had a yellow tang, right? This was my first tank. And so I had listened to all the rules, and I took the yellow tang out of the tank. I put it down the frag systems down in the basement, put the purple tang in. He was obviously doing just fine. Months later, I added the yellow tang back to the tank, and boom, man, he just went after the purple tang and attacked the crap out of him. He knew his home, man. And he tore him up, and I'm oh my God, I gotta get him out of there. I put the net in, and the purple tang swam right into the net, and I scooped him out. I'm whoa, I thought there was gonna be a giant pain in the butt. Okay, so the nature of that, you may not get that lucky, but that stressed out fish isn't as good at hiding in many cases. They're weaker, they're not really as aware of their surroundings, and you might actually be able to catch them with your hand better than the net. So
I will say, okay, I retract my statement. I have experienced this, and it was on the 160 when we put a 6-line wrasse. Okay, so after we ran into Monty eating nudibranchs, we put a 6-line in there. That 6-line started to go and beat up your diamond or your gobies, and he eventually killed them, the twin spots. I caught the twin spots because they were up here floating on the surface, avoiding being anywhere near where that 6-line could just bombard them and surprise them. So they were just floating up here, and I literally walked up to the tank and I just went like this and scooped them right up. They were there, and put them back in the sump.
So
But-
often a stressed fish is a lot easier to catch than a super healthy fish. Also, sometimes this works, especially the first couple times you do it. Red light. So in theory, a lot of these fish can't see red light. Their eyes aren't accustomed to it because red doesn't really penetrate seawater very well. And so they haven't evolved the need to see red light.
Yeah.
So if you use your LEDs and only turn on just the red LEDs, and probably the dimmer the better.
Yeah, because I think they'll eventually. I think our experience here on the 160, we had the reds up so high that it was kind of a wash at the end.
See. But you have to black out the whole room. Like do this at night.
Yeah.
You can actually catch some fish in red light because you can see them, but they can't see you. However, they will start to feel
That pressure of your net.
Of the net, what it feels like when it's coming after them. So you don't get many shots at this. You might want to try with your hand first, but if you're having problems catching a stressed fish, you might want to try the red LEDs. Only turn those on. It will probably depend on the spectrum. Like the Radions are more red, whereas the Kessel one's a little bit more orangey. It'll depend on the specific fish, their eyeballs, and their ability to sense the net as well.
Yeah, darken out the room and let it stay dark for a little while. Prep your lights and your thing and just be ready to go so that way when you flip the reds on, you're quick to act.
It kind of paralyzes them too.
Yeah.
So if it's pitch black in the room, like literally no light, and you just turn the reds on all of a sudden, they will sense something went on, and they just kind of like freeze for a second. Gives you a chance to be quick.
We also believe matters most is alternating isolation. That goes back to that approach by Elliot in your fish that are already in the tank and have been in the tank. You introduce somebody new in the acclimation box, and when you're ready to kind of give them a swap, take that one established one that's already in there, scoop him out, put the new one in, and then put the old one in the acclimation box, kind of give him a timeout. But you're shifting like that. I can imagine like the established fish just isn't used to it. He's so cut into his territory. I know all the places to go. I know where to hide. I know where to ambush this new guy. And then you have me locked up in a box while I get to sit here and watch this dude trounce on my territory.
So in the spirit of also high percentage paths, but not perfect, is if you're going to add two fish that you know full well are going to fight with each other, being like two yellow tanks.
Fish, yeah.
Bigger than the existing fish will probably have the highest success rates.
Yeah, that little guy is less likely to pick on a big, heavy guy.
Yeah, so like if the new yellow tang you add is 50% bigger than the old one, it's going to have a higher success rate than other options. And like note that every one of these fish have a personality, and so you'll never get the end-all answer to this. It's just if you had to pick one, bigger than the existing one is a higher percentage path.
Antithesis of that same size is one of the lowest success rates.
The lowest possible success rate is if you got one that's the exact same size.
I mean, you're almost talking immediately fight.
The theory here is that you don't go pick on something bigger than because you know you're going to lose. If you go pick on something that's your same size, you may think you're going to win either one of these things.
Yeah.
So then the middle of this is you can also have success by picking something that is the smallest, like meaning it's half the size of the existing one. And that's better than same size, but not as good as bigger. And just the reason for it is the smaller one is obviously just more fragile.
Yeah.
So if it does get picked on, it's not going to be able to handle it as well. So.
All right.
Hard lessons in all of this adding saltwater fish intelligently and safely. First one?
First hard lesson is slow drip acclimations and temperature oxygen levels.
Yeah, so a lot of people, slower and patience is like part of drilled into the mentality of reefing, but some of this stuff isn't wise.
Like too slow? Like 6 hours of a drip, of an IV drip into a bucket?
Yeah, so if I drip 6 hours in there, the chemistry will turn over very slow, but like the reality is it's too slow to actually heat the water too. So I'm maintaining room temperature water now in this thing. Also, there is a low amount of oxygen that's coming through this thing. So in most cases, I wouldn't like take a 6 hour drip. I would, follow probably the acclimation that comes in the box because they might have something specific to you. But in general, I try to turn over the water in an hour.
Yeah.
You know, I'm going to try to turn most of that water over fairly quickly. If I turn it over fairly quickly, the temperature from the water will help hold the temperature in the bag. But I mean, I might even do it as close as a half hour. I just try to like not shock it totally, but just throw it in a completely different environment. But there's a lot of different things that slow acclimation can actually harm. So we'll hit on a couple of them. So, but the next hard lesson here is float the bag and dump might be the best if the parameters are similar. We said that earlier.
Yeah. The pH up here at the top, where what we believe most is that temperature and pH matter most, and salinity if it's way off. Well, if you've got your temperature set because you floated the bag and got the temperature right, and pH is similar in your tank water and versus the bag, and salinity's on point, then your best bet is probably to just hand scoop the fish out, put them in the tank, ready to go, or acclimation box.
That'd be the least stressful if the parameters match. One of the things we talked about earlier too in the ammonia thing in a different episode was ammonia in the bag and ammonia blockers often don't mix, and system has water and copper. So one of the things about what can happen is when you ship that bag, especially this isn't as much from a fish store, but if you had it shipped overnight via FedEx or UPS, the thing will come, and what will happen is it actually will have respirated a lot, meaning there's a bunch of CO2 extra in their water. The pH is low. They will have ammonia in there because the copper prevented them from adding ammonia blocker in many cases. And so what will happen now is the low pH, all of the ammonia in there is actually ammonium and not toxic. However, if you open the bag up and you start putting new fresh water in there, or new water from your tank in there, all of a sudden the pH goes up, the ammonium turns into ammonia gas, and super toxic to the fish. So, like, in that case, if I'm letting it gas off for the course of the next 5 hours as I'm super slow drip acclimating, I might be actually harming the fish.
Just breathing toxic.
Yeah, part of the reason why you want to turn over a little faster than, like, I think some of the acclimation of doing this over 6 hours or some long prolonged thing is because it feels good to say that. It isn't necessarily the best.
You eased them into it, yeah.
It just sounds good, and plausible theory in reefing is good as fact in many cases.
Hard lesson again is assuming that aggression won't happen to you. Aggression. Interspecies aggression happens, different species aggression happens. I said the 6 line here, in the 160 attacked quite a few different fish. But aggression, if you assume aggression won't happen to you, that's a hard lesson to learn. We already learned it.
Another one is consider habitat and make changes. And so if you're looking in there and things don't look like they're going well, look around and say, have I really built enough habitat for these things? And if they haven't, you can always add some more rock.
Yeah.
You can build those little structures that we talked about in the aquascape stuff and just glue a bunch of little pebbles together essentially with a bunch of holes in it and put it in. Some of the fish will move right in. And so don't think that you're stuck with the aquascape or the habitat you've already created, because you can always add more and add safety to the fish. All right?
Hard lesson, a lot of problems are not diagnosable. You just got to do your best. You can't plan for everything, and whether your 6 chromies are going to work their way down to 1, or adding another clownfish when there's a pair in there, or tangs especially. You just can't predict for all of them. And even if you did some of those acclimation boxes, or you did the separation, all you're doing, you're not guaranteeing that none of these problems will happen, and fish aggression and all this will happen. Just increasing your chances of success that they don't.
I can't diagnose a whole fish. If I have one of those, I can't diagnose that problem in many cases. You just do the best we can, and if you follow a bunch of the things that we have here, I think that you'll be light years in terms of higher success rate path than most of the people who are just kind of winging it.
Whole point of this series.
All right, so what's next?
We are on episode 16, talking about ATOs and reducing the daily maintenance safely. So episode 16 of the 52 weeks was all about ATOs, and I I would imagine that not a lot has changed here. We've just gotten smarter about a few things.
A couple of things have changed, I think, about ATOs since we talked about it, but it's a pretty robust area.
It's a very robust
There's a couple
area.
of tips in here. If you listen to it, you'd say, oh yeah, I could do this better.
Didn't even think about that. Yeah.
Yeah. So core belief here is, core belief in terms of auto top-offs is, this guides all of us in all the decisions that we'll make, is water level valves and sensors have a high failure rate in salt water. The best ATOs will embrace that, right? And so that it's just true. Water level valves and sensors have a high failure rate in salt water, specifically high organic salt water.
Yeah.
So, all right, what do we believe most then?
First thing that we believe matters most in terms of ATOs, ATO eliminates one of the biggest tasks. One area where one of the most expensive is actually the most popular when it comes to like buying an ATO. This is one of those areas where one of the most expensive options is the most popular, and there's probably a reason for it because it has a long history of being trustworthy.
Yeah. So ATO being like, I used to walk up there and pour fresh water in the top of the tank.
It's a remnant of the freshwater community, because I remember that worrying about the evaporation was just nothing. The only thing that I was worried about is in freshwater evaporation was that nasty scum line at the top, and I'm like, I want to get rid of that. Let me top off the water.
Well, there's two differences here now that between freshwater.
Yeah.
Freshwater, there isn't as much flow, so the evaporation is much slower.
Yeah.
Two, in saltwater, freshwater, if you evaporate, the only thing that really changed is the water level went down. In
Not
saltwater,
everything.
all the chemistry is getting more potent. The salt isn't going anywhere.
Yep.
And the water's going
Neither is
somewhere.
the calcium,
It's getting more and more
alkalinity.
concentrated.
Yeah, all of everything.
So bad
Okay.
news, but also not the kind of thing that everybody wants to do is go top it off every single day, because many tanks, because we burn through so much more water, you may need a gallon of water every day. And so auto top off solves that, and end of story. Tunes Oscillator is the one that everyone uses. It's the one that if you want one that doesn't flood your floor, it's gonna protect your tank, your house, all of it.
Lasts.
It is the most trusted, longest used one. I'd say, it's a tough jump after that. If I had to jump after that,
like a second, yeah.
it would probably be, hasn't been as round as long, but it'd probably be the Neptune ATK, just because it has an incorporated float valve in it, which isn't as susceptible to many things as the float switches and opticals.
Yeah.
It has the timer issue. It even has you can plug in the leak sensors into it, so you're not, it's like, optical float, timers, and
Leak
then backed up. Even if it
backups,
did, then all
yeah.
of a sudden there's leak sensors, level sensors you can plug into it, even higher. So and then also you get the audible alarms with it. If it failed, I'm gonna get an email that says, "Go save me."
Yeah.
You don't get that. So the only reason I would put the Oscillator over the ATK in that case would be just because
It's got such a long, trusted history.
Okay, early on I had 3 different auto top offs fail me, flooded my floor, messed up my tank. I switched the Oscillator, and now I've got 17 years and 8 million tanks, and I've never had an Oscillator pause in on position flooding the tank. The opticals will get dirty and fail off sometimes, but that's not my biggest concern. And so just based on experience alone, and we use them here and no tank would ever consider anything else.
I think there's more oscillators on tanks here than any other thing. Like 90 to 95% of tanks running in this building have an oscillator on it. I mean, I wouldn't choose anything else for my own tank. And when I set up my mom's tank, oscillator. You best be sure. Next thing that matters most is kind of funny is don't use the latest tech, no matter how sexy it is.
You're dealing with water, man. It's gonna flood on your floor and all this stuff. And I've seen them. Everybody comes out. The next one is cheaper. It's better. It's faster.
5,
whatever.
6 redundancies.
18 million sensors on it. I don't know. Here's the piece: is if it's significantly cheaper and you want to save some money, then so be it. I understand that one. If it's in the same price range as the Oscillator, I don't understand.
I'd recommend.
I don't know why you would use something that is less proven. I don't get it at all. All right. Next one here is the float valve. Valve meaning not a switch, but a valve like your little toilet valve.
Yep.
Are the best redundancy and put it well above the water line. Meaning, I don't want the float valve to be the primary, which is telling me the water line, because salt creep can actually build up in the little seal, like where the rubber is, and then prevent it from sealing. And I don't want it to be the primary for that reason. So what I'll do is I'll drill a hole and put it a few inches above the water line.
Yep.
So the sensors, the float switch or the optical sensors are adjusting, but if for whatever reason those things were to fail, the water level would go up, it'd hit the float, and it would just shut off the water supply. We have drill bits. You can drill a hole right through your glass in your glass sump. We have any old drill bit probably can get through your acrylic sump.
Good old stepper, yeah.
To be able to put a float. It's like a 1/2 inch, I think, hole that you're going to drill just to put in the float valve. I think everyone should do this. It's like a $13 thing, and especially if you're going to use a cheaper float or ATO,
Yeah.
it is a really easy, $10 or so solution.
If you're thinking of running the ATOs kind of the way we do around here with ATO box sensors, ATO box filled with connected to your RODI unit, and then the ATO box feeding the tank. On the 160, we actually have the RODI unit connected directly to the tank with layers of redundancy all the way there, and the last layer being that float valve.
All right. Next thing we believe most is an auto top-off should hold about a week's worth of water, but not overflow the tank. So, I would get the biggest auto top-off I could get without overflowing the tank. So if it failed and emptied all of the fresh water in there for some reason, it would stay inside of the sump.
It's pretty easy to calculate or get an idea of how much water your tank's evaporating, and it will change based on your ambient temperature, season, whatever season it is,
Humidity.
drifts, all kinds of those things will change. But I can fill up a 5-gallon or a bucket or a 1-gallon jug with put my ATO in there and be like, all right, well, how long? It's empty by the end of the day. That's a gallon. That's a gallon a day. A week's worth would be a 7-gallon ATO or a 5-gallon ATO.
With a 5-gallon bucket, see how many days. I would say the reason I only say about a week is because I'd like to do a little bit of maintenance every week. So on the weekend, I'll find a chunk of time to be able to do some maintenance, and then filling the auto top off once a week is no big deal. Doing it every day sucks.
And the second part of that was not enough to overflow the tank, meaning if for some reason your ATO were to get stuck on, there's not enough water in there that would overfill your tank to the point where it starts overfilling onto the floor.
Yeah, and if you added 10 gallons of fresh water to your 100-gallon tank because the ATO failed,
10%
is that
loss
good for the tank? No, but yeah, it's only a 10% reduction. So your alkalinity just fell from 8 to 7.2.
Yeah,
it's going to survive that. So you can fix that. So I wouldn't get too hung up on what the fresh water is going to do to the tank unless it's total catastrophe, like you hooked it up to a 50-gallon drum and that whole thing went in. Well, then you're probably dead. A week seems about the right time. But you can also do more with the right amount of redundancy.
Yeah. So we believe matters most is the ATO box can hold more water capacity than a week with redundancy. That's the I've got my flow lock on my RODI line that feeds my ATO box, that has a float valve in it, that has a leak sensors all around it connected to a solenoid that will shut the water flow off, and all these different types of sensors that you can put in there. Even like optical sensors just inside the ATO reservoir, where I have a high sensor and a low sensor, and I know when the water is too high for me, and I know when it hits the bottom. Even just being aware of that when you're not around.
So Randy might have just lost you with all the sensors here. There's a lot of redundancy. When you're talking about redundancy, it's going to be solenoids, flows, it could be 8 million things, right?
Yeah.
I will tell you, this is just me, but if I had the space, if I had an oscillator and I incorporated the float valve into the sump, I'd plug it into a 50-gallon drum, no problem. The chances of the oscillator, it's been working for me on dozens and dozens and dozens of tanks for a decade plus. And then if it were to fail, also the float valve would catch it. good. I'm good.
Easy.
If all that stuff fails, I wasn't meant to have this tank. So, but you can also go past that. You could put a backup of a solenoid on there, or like a solenoid from like your Apex. They have little 1/4-inch solenoids.
Yep.
You could put a float valve or a water sensor or a
Flow lock.
optical sensor on there. The flow lock thing he's talking about is like, it's like basically an RO fitting with a little cotton wad in there, and if it detects water, the cotton water like wicks it up and then pushes the valve open.
Closes it.
Yeah, so like a really manual, cheap solution. Another one is just even the audible alarm from the Watchdog. A $12 thing you get Home Depot or from here. Just, hey, dude, I failed. Water's go over. But a really good auto top off and the float valve. I'm comfortable that that's enough redundancy for a pretty big body of water. Next one.
Oh, what we believe matters most. You can hook an RO system up to the tank, despite popular belief and what I was told. You don't hook your RO system straight to the tank with the float valve because you're just asking for failure. But you can with enough redundancies in place.
It's tempting, man. And like, here's the nature of it: is you're plugging in with an RO system going to your tank. You're plugging in a basically never-ending water supply to the tank. If it fails, it's going to fail catastrophically.
Pour. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, is it a terrible idea? I don't know, but God, is it convenient? I mean, like, you'll never, ever, ever fill up your auto top off again. You'll never carry another bucket of water again in your life if you hook up your RO system directly to the tank. And there are better ways to do it than others, but you can do it.
Solenoids.
So, yeah, one, definitely the float valve is important in this case. But the solenoids.
Yeah.
So think of a couple of different solenoid options.
We have, I think the 160 is tied to the Tunesy sensors, but it goes to, is it the safety switch or something that toggles off and on the solenoid?
So with the Tunes Osmo, you can unplug the pump. It comes with a little powered pump, and you can plug in a
Powered
solenoid. Yep.
So now instead of having a pump turn on and off and pump water in, it just opens and closes a valve to your direct RODI line from your RODI unit. And so when the water level sensor, optical sensor says, hey, time for water, just pops open the water line, fresh RODI water from your unit gets there, and then when it hits the other sensor, shuts it down. Like laden with redundancies, those flow lock things, just in case the solenoid failed open, because it's powered. When it's on under power, it's powered open. So that
it overheats.
It can overheat and fuse together. Yeah.
Yeah, it will definitely fail. So that's an option. You can also do the same thing with an Apex and the solenoid that plugs into it as well. You can use level sensors and the ATK with that as well. But there's a variety of ways that you can hook it up that way. Our favorite way is actually to just use a float valve onto an auto top-off box, like a 10-gallon auto top-off box, and have that thing always full just from opening and closing. And then in that case, off of that, have the osmometer in there and the float valve in the tank. And the reality of that float valve failing catastrophically in fresh water is really, really low.
Yeah, it's clean, ultra pure RODI water. There's hardly a contaminant buildup or anything else.
I've never heard of one of these float valves failing in a freshwater environment. It's kind of like your toilet. It's pretty rare. Can it happen? Sure.
And there's for some people, there's a concern that people might ask themselves, well, what about leaching, or the term is leaking my mind. Letting the ATO box go all the way down.
TDS creep?
Yeah, TDS creep. But how do you avoid TDS creep? Because as soon as you turn your RO on, meaning that slightest little downturn in my float valve means it's calling for water from my RODI unit, which could be TDS, a high amount of TDS in there. You can use like a Tunes, water controller has two float valves or float sensors. So when your ATO container gets down to the bottom one, then it opens up the solenoid to fill up your your ATO reservoir, rather than only going a little bit and then filling back up, only going a little bit and filling it back up. You can actually use the whole container at once, so it fills the whole container at once.
Not sure how much that water controller is, but it's over $100.
Yeah.
So for the average person, the TDS just burning through more resin is probably cheaper. But like if you have 500 TDS water, and then that initial purge every time is 60, 70, or 100 TDS coming through, you're burning through resin like nobody's business. And so having that ability to let it drain all the way out and fill it up, probably having some of the auto flush features and a booster pump and stuff would help as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, that is the way that we would hook up an RO system directly to the tank. If you do that, you'll never, ever, ever carry another bucket of fresh water again.
It's really nice.
And less maintenance means that you can actually maintain the things that are most important. Next one.
Sensors need to be cleaned. Waiting for failure is a low percentage.
Optical sensor, if it's dirty, doesn't work.
You should probably bathe these in citric acid monthly or at least quarterly.
I find just even a rag, man, just cleaning the algae and gunk and stuff off of it. Anything will, because they're usually in the dark, so they're not getting like a lot of anything super crusty or anything on them.
Yeah.
But the alternative though is the float switches generally get salt creep.
Those are the quickest to fail because they got stuck and they were dirty.
So in that spirit, what we believe matters most is floats usually get dirty and fail off. Basically what it's doing is it's like a little cone and it shoots like a light beam down and it hits the angle, comes back over and comes back up. If the water isn't there, it doesn't happen.
Optical, yep.
Yeah, so if you submerge the optical, it's like a little cone, beam comes down, bounces over, goes back up. As long as it sees that, when it's submerged in water, it will continue to work. If it's not submerged in water, the beam actually passes through. So when it's dirty, it also does the same thing when it's basically not submerged in water.
Basically fails off. The opposite of that is the floats. Floats fail on and off. So like my float could be normally open, normally closed, up or down, or what have you. But salt creep builds up if my float switch is down in the bottom. Salt creep builds up on the top, can't go back up. Vice versa, it could be up here and it gets dirty and whatnot underneath. So when it tries to go down, it gets stuck, or wandering snail, or what have you. But they can fail both on and off.
Moving parts in salt creep are a bad mix.
Always.
And that's why often with like the osmolator, you'll see that the float is the secondary and it's above the water level. It's not sitting there submerged. And actually there is they usually give you a second set of magnets and you can actually move the float much higher
Anywhere
if you
want,
to.
yeah.
Yeah, so optical sensors usually fail off, which is less of a concern. Floats actually can fail on and dump water in. Off, I will say the number one concern with failing off is related to your sump design. If your sump only houses the return pump area, only has a gallon of water, and you evaporate a gallon of water a day,
First thing
that is where it's going to empty first, is where the return pump is pumping water out, and then the pumps are going to start to run dry in as little as a day. So that is probably the biggest concern. I will also tell you that I've had mixed results with other technologies, being some of them operate on temperature, some of them operate on conductivity. Hydor had one on conductivity. I never used it, but the reviews were pretty poor on it. Like salt, also, no matter what it is, tends to corrode almost anything it touches, even the best.
Even if it's titanium?
Specifically, if it's kind of submerged to water and exposed to a lot of oxygen, it just oxidizes so much faster. I'm trying to think of another one that was conductivity.
Did Innovative Marine had one? Yeah.
Does that one still exist?
Two little prongs? It might, actually.
You have to read the reviews for sure. The one that was based on temperature, some of you will remember this one, I don't know if it still exists even, is the Elos one. So Elos had a really sexy one, which is the only thing that went in your tank was this tiny little, basically like a 2-watt heater or something, right? Like just a couple watt heater that went in the tank. And basically, if it was submerged, it wouldn't heat up. If it wasn't submerged, then it would heat up and it would trigger the auto top up. Okay, so I will tell you, I actually had pretty good results with that thing, and I liked it. But the overall from the community was it sucked.
Sounds like it would fail on more than anything else.
I don't. It worked for me, and it was like I don't know. If you needed a low profile one, like like an all-in-one, or I don't know, man. I thought it was like. I'd be curious if it still even exists because LOS just isn't as widely distributed as it once was. But there are other technologies out there than just optical and float sensors, but
it goes back up to one of the most popular, is also the most expensive and most trusted over years.
Yep, and don't use the latest tech. I don't care how sexy. So unless you want to be the trailblazer, so be it.
We believe matters most is that you can hide your ATO next to the tank. I adopted a piece of furniture from I picked up a 40 breeder on Craigslist. Some guy was shutting it down. He had made his own acrylic box inside a little stool that was like leather top type stool. Looked like a piece of furniture. You can actually sit on it and take your shoes off and turn them on or put them on or what have you. But inside was the ATO reservoir. Easy peasy.
So yeah, I mean, you can put all kinds of things next to a tank. So go to like a Home Goods or all that kind of stuff.
A little hamper, a little table.
Like a chest.
Yeah.
So you can get like a chest, and then inside there you can put a box to hold all your water. You could probably put your test kits and stuff in there too, and throw a little decorative rug over the top to make your spouse happy, and it will just look like a piece of furniture in the room, and not an auto top-off box. So
or you could do it like me in my old house and just put a brute trash can in the hallway. That was really ugly and such an eyesore.
For a long time I had just a 5-gallon bucket sitting next to the tank, which is like, man, I built this thing to be beautiful. I bought a beautiful stand, a beautiful tank. And then I've got 5-gallon buckets sitting next to it. And like for $50, I could go to the Home Goods and find either a footstool or something like that to be able to
with storage.
I don't. This is one of those things where like I feel like there's a missed opportunity for somebody to make these things. Like somebody's good with acrylic, go to Home Goods and like create
Start fitting.
autotopfootstool.com. And you could create things because I think a lot of people would buy a little piece of furniture that can go next to the tank and store all that water.
Yeah, you don't even need acrylic. Just think of anything that will hold water, a week's worth of water, regardless of shape, size, or what have you, and find a container or find something that it can fit in that doesn't look like it's just a container sitting next to your tank.
Yeah, anything that can fit in there, absolutely. All right, another thing you can do with the auto top-offs is you may not understand, like if you want to get a week, but your container isn't big enough, is you can change the evaporation with a lid, flow, or fan. They'll all impact these things. So most of the evaporation comes from new air interacting with the surface of the water. So if you put a lid on the tank, that will block some light for sure, and probably more than you think. But if you're like at a fish only, you may not care. And what it will do is prevent all that evaporation. So like I think of the old like JBJ like cube tanks.
Oh, the BioCubes?
BioCubes, right? Those things that had like a kind of almost a sealed lid on it.
Hardly would evaporate.
Dude, I could put like a cup of water a week in there. So great for like a low maintenance home environment, for an office environment.
Yeah.
So if you put that top on there, you were not evaporating water at all, right?
I think back to my 125 and going from a 40 breeder that didn't evaporate as much volume-wise to when I went to my 125 and realizing just how much an open top, open sump with a display sump on the backside actually evaporated by following the mold and the water growth in my windows when it was wintertime and cold outside. I would... Not just to help you save on how much water you have to store in your ATO, but slow evaporation if some of those humidity problems are your problem.
Yeah. So next one here is RODI as a source of fresh water is the only thing that won't build up contaminants over time. And I doubt most people have thought of this. Like most people are. Almost everybody that's serious about this is using RODI water, right? But this is a good feel-good point on this then for making the right decision here, because you don't really know what's in your tap water, And it's one thing to make up some salt water, like with some tap water is dechlorinated or whatever. It's only whatever's in there today. However, when you are replacing the evaporated water, remember we said earlier, like when the water evaporates, the salt doesn't go anywhere. It just gets like more concentrated. The water is the thing that's leaving. Same thing with whatever's coming out of your tap water. So if I got copper in my tap water, if I've got silicates in my tap water, if I've got any number of negative things, iron and stuff in there. If I got all that stuff in my tap water, I'm adding it to replace the evaporation every day. So every day I'm adding another gallon worth of that stuff in the water, 365 days a year. Yeah.
Talk about building
It's just
up.
building up every single day. So it's not that, I put some tap water in there today and it wasn't toxic. Now we're talking about the buildup of 365 days times every single year after that. And so that is why we use RODI water for tap off, is because it's the only thing that won't add anything to the water other than water. It's the water that's leaving. We're replacing the water. We're not adding more elements.
Ultra pure water. Yeah.
Yeah. That is the best reason as to that. So there are some hard lessons here.
First hard lesson with ATO redundancy and daily maintenance safely. Caulk in the ATO is the biggest risk, and we started doing this Master of the Apex series where we're talking about how to implement caulk washer smartly and safely, and that was the eye-opening aha moment where I will not go back to dosing caulk out of an ATO again if I wanted to use caulk. I've done caulk washer before and increased its saturation with a little bit of vodka in that big 25-gallon brute trash can, and then that 25-gallon brute trash can would would ATO my top off my tank for like almost a month. But I had to replace my Tunes osmolator pump twice because it failed, because it was in that corrosive caulk washer environment. And there were times where my little egg crate solution to keep the pump off of the slurry, that little zip tie that hold the pump on didn't actually hold, and then off with the pump would go into the slurry down in the bottom, and now I'm dosing just straight caulk washer paste slurry into my tank.
Just so many ways for this to go wrong, and it's tempting because it's a really easy water manage. It's the only thing is to get like calc in your auto top off is going to manage calcium, alkalinity, pH, and salinity.
All naturally too, because it evaporates and it fills itself back up.
Super tempting. There's just so many things that can go wrong with it. So if I were to do that, I would definitely put the whole thing on a pH controller. But I would actually, instead of buying the pH controller, what I'd probably do is just buy a dosing pump and dose the calc slurry instead.
Yeah,
not slurry. Dose the saturated calc.
Yeah,
instead.
get yourself a reservoir like an ATO reservoir, but not in any way related to your ATO. And then put a dosing pump on that caulk washer reservoir and just dose daily instead of tying it to your ATO.
Okay, we mentioned this a little bit earlier, but hard lesson. Solenoids will fail, not if, but when, and by that I mean most of them will fail within 12 months. Yeah, they're just not designed to last a long time, especially when most of the time their powered function is open. So
yeah, that's the big one.
If it was normally closed or normally open and it just required power to close, well, they'll probably last a lot longer. It depends on the function for the solenoid.
Right.
But if it's on, powered most of the time, it's going to wear out. I just would never trust a solenoid to last more than 12 months, which puts it in that category of...
Like heater category, replace it.
Replace it.
Yeah.
Or... Man, your redundancy better be good because you need to count on this thing failing. It's not or, it has to be both.
It will, yeah, it will fail.
Your redundancy has to be, your redundancy game, if you're relying on a solenoid, has to be really good because you have to 100% count on that thing failing. If that's your only thing, if a solenoid functioning is the only thing between dead tank and live tank, it's already a dead tank. It just hasn't happened yet.
This is why we manage it and mitigate that risk by putting instead of running the RODI system straight to the tank, we run the RODI system to a 10 or 5 or 10 gallon reservoir. So if and when that solenoid gets stuck or powers on or fails on, the only thing it's going to do is fill up that ATO reservoir to the point where the float valve, the other redundancy, goes like this and closes, and that's as far as the water is going to go.
Another one here is, this one's really important. How secure the sensors are attached matters, because if you have the sensors just willy-nilly in there, like I think of, what's that little teeny one that plays the song? There's an ATO that has like it's a little teeny guy, and it has a little magnetic optical on the other side.
Duetto or Aqua, I forget which one that one is.
I forget, but it's the problem with it. Yeah, that's it right there. That Duetto. Yeah. So the problem with it isn't the fact that it doesn't work. It's the fact that it's just barely magnetically coupled through the glass, and the tiniest little bump, the thing falls off, stops functioning.
Another one I'd be worried about too are those sensors that sense through the glass, water level through the glass. Same thing. And probably another reason why the Tunes oscillator's track record is so well known is because if you've ever taken and tried to take apart those Tunes magnets when they get together, I mean, you're talking like all of your arm strength, even like putting it on the side of a table to try to help force it and dislodge it off. So a strong magnet.
So just think about it. However your float sensor is attached, if you think that it looks like it's loose and it could fail, it will. It just hasn't happened yet.
We learned the hard lesson of how unplugging is a common issue. So a couple things. One, that annoying sound because from the Tunes oscillator, because my water level's too high. I just got done with a water change. I know I'm waiting for the water level to kind of readjust itself and get back, but my ATO is just screaming. All right, let me just unplug you for a couple minutes until the water level comes back, and then I'll come back and I'll plug it back in. We'll be good. Week later, dry tank. I completely forgot to plug that Tunes that ATO back in.
Unplugging the ATO is a super common issue, and mostly related to those alarms. And that's a good reason to use, like you said, like you do a water change, the chances you're going to change at the exact drop of water is pretty low.
Yeah.
So another good reason to use the extra set of magnets they gave you to move the float, which is the alarm,
offset them
up just a little higher.
Yeah,
right?
give you a little more space.
Give you a little, prevent you from making the dumb mistake of unplugging it.
Or use feed modes, and when you're doing maintenance or doing something, have everything automated, so when I push a button to do some maintenance, it's automatically going to come back on, and my ATO has like a 5-minute delay to where the water level set. It does all the work for me. I don't have to try to remember or leave my keys or whatever to plug it back in.
So there's all kinds of reasons where I'm doing work on the tanks. Like, so if I'm floating bags in the tank,
unplug the
fish,
ATO.
I would normally go unplug the ATO because it's going to scream at me.
100%.
If I'm going to do a water change, I'll turn the return pumps off, and then it goes up in the sump. Unplug it. There's 50 different reasons why I'd unplug the ATO to stop it from screaming at me. Yeah. Instead, if I use the Apex and just hit the feed mode, what it will do is it'll turn it off for the next 60 minutes and then turn it back on.
Yeah.
That to me is the right solution. I also have used Kyle's boxes in that case. Like if I'm gonna do a water changes, I'll go hit the one button or the one little toggle switch, and then the Apex, it'll tell the Apex to turn off both the return pumps, turn off both the UVs, turn off all of the power heads, turn off the protein skimmer. When I turn the thing back on, make sure to delay the protein skimmer for about 20 minutes to let the water level normalize before the skimmer comes back on. We'll do all those things within a single switch.
Without me plugging the power.
What would I have to have done before, man? It would have been 8 million switches, and then it allows me to leave 2 of the Kessels on or something so I can still see in the tank, without pulling cords. So, that is one of the biggest issues with a hard lesson with ATO is there's so many reasons to pull the cord on it. Don't do any of them.
We also, hard lesson to take some advice from is nano ATOs are designed for nano tanks. And for me, my definition of nano for me is like 40 gallons and below.
Sure.
But Oh, there's run times or max run times on some of these pumps. There's some ATOs that come with this little tiny little pump right here. Well, there's no way that's keeping up with like my gallon and a half per day or 2 gallons per day on a 125. So just because your ATO is cheap doesn't mean that it's going to match your size of a tank. A lot of the cheaper options are for nano tanks.
Yeah, so like the Tunes Osmolar Nano is specifically designed for a smaller tank. I don't remember the exact gallons, probably say the product description.
Yeah, 50 I think somewhere.
Yeah, but like the main reason is because it will the timer inside of it will cut off at some point in time and just manually shut it off because it knows that it's on a smaller tank.
Yeah.
And it also doesn't have the same optical sensors and stuff in it. It's relying on time and mechanical float switch.
Yeah, they are made for nano.
All right. Another hard lesson here is the cheap ATO does not cost less. You just think it does because you're thinking about the cost of the actual ATO. When the cheap one destroys your floors or some element of your tank and floods and causes you all your time, you will find out that the cheap one costs you more, especially when you go replace it with a more expensive one.
100%.
So yeah, don't think that the cheap one costs less because in the end it almost certainly doesn't. There is, again, just a handful of areas where the
most expensive is the most popular.
Yeah, it's because the whole community has completely adopted this as the best option. Tunes Osmolator is one of them. All right, what's next?
We are on episode 17 of the 52 Weeks of Reefing. This one is called Protein Skimmers, Selecting and Tuning the Best. A lot of knowledge change from when that episode came out to now. Tons of Investigates episodes, tons of thought process, changes to designs. We're going to talk about that, starting with our core belief.
Yeah, from 2015 to close to 2022 now.
Evolutionary leaps of thinking.
It's not even the same conversation. That conversation was so high level, and we're ready now to dive in deeper.
Yep.
Okay, so core belief on protein skimmers here is a good skimmer is one that works well for 2 fish as well as 20. Meaning the entire journey that you have is not going to only work on the beginning or the end and not going to make you buy a new skimmer 100 times.
And yes, you can have both.
It is absolutely true. You can get one that works for the entire journey. So a good skimmer is one that works for both 2 fish as well as 20. The best skimmer will increase growth 50% of your coral.
Your skimmer.
Your skimmer will increase the growth rate of your coral 50%. The best ones, we'll get to the heart of that, but it's related to gas exchange and pH. Mm-hmm. So the skimmer is a totally underutilized tool for controlling the pH of your tank and preventing all the carbon dioxide and carbonic acid from entering the tank.
We believe matters most. One of the first things we believe matters most about skimmers is that a skimmer is optional and it only serves to reduce other work, specifically maintenance. So changing your filter socks. Well, actually not that one. The filter socks come first, but it's optional. You don't have to have one. And all-in-one tanks where I think 2 days ago in like day 2 we were talking about some of these all-in-ones. No, it was day 1. We were talking about these options for beginners and stuff like that. And all-in-one systems are great because you can do a water change and that is your filtration or your main approach to filtration. Mm-hmm. Larger bodies of water, protein skimmer will pull some of those organics out before they break down and into stuff. But it's optional. You don't have to.
Yeah, dude. E170, perfect example. Yeah.
Even if your mechanical filtration and like your refugium game is so strong, a skimmer might be an option.
I think there's several tanks at WWC where they turn them off periodically.
Yeah.
Right. And so a skimmer is optional. There's lots of benefits you're going to hear about today, but don't think about this as it's like an absolutely necessary piece of equipment. It will add a lot of value. If I could tell you that you could do half as many water changes or feed twice as much or have twice as many fish if you have one, well, those are all really legitimate reasons, but like it isn't necessary because almost all of it is just a replacement for other filtration.
Yeah.
All right, the skimmer. What we also believe most, the skimmer that pulls out the most poo and decaying matter smells like it. Okay, it's just true.
Yeah, if your skimmer doesn't stink like skimmate, like poo and dying matter, then it's probably not working as well as it
Okay,
should.
here's the deal: is basically in that cup is filled with decaying matter, right? In theory.
Yeah.
And then in the water, it's filled with decaying matter, being rotten fish poop or rotten food and fish poop, right? And then we're blowing air over those two things.
Through it.
If it doesn't stink coming out of that, it's not working very well, right? And so, do you want your house to stink? No.
Yeah.
And there's ways to get around that we'll share in just a second.
Yeah.
But if yours, you're like, you know what, mine doesn't sink and it's not really collecting those things you're talking about, and it's just kind of some opaque water, well, it's probably not doing very much for you.
Yeah.
It should stink, it should smell terrible, and if it doesn't, you should consider either tuning it better or get one that does stink.
Every time we dump a skimmer cup here in the studio utility sink, the people that work right outside the studio doors are like, oh, what was that? Like that's the way it should smell.
Okay, in my house that had a cold air return in the room that I would do it, you'd smell it 3 floors away. Right? You'd smell it on the second floor.
That's how you know it's good.
Yeah, you know it when my wife is yelling at me for cleaning out the skimmer, but in reality, I could walk in that room and it would just stink because the air is flowing over the turds, man. It's like a fart machine. It should stink though. If it doesn't stink, you should wonder why it doesn't.
Yeah.
I know, it's a kind of a
So
conundrum.
weird.
You don't want it to stink, but if it doesn't stink, it's not working.
We also believe matters most that dry foam has a higher ratio of organic content versus water and air, and it's created by reducing the amount of air.
Yeah, so think of what dry skim aid is. It means that there's way more organics in it and much less of the air and water in
A
it.
lot of times it's what can I scrape and how much of it when I run my hand on the inside of the neck of that skimmer cup. If you got yourself a large amount of brown material, that is very dry, came from dry foam.
Yeah, so if I had dry foam and I just scooped up the foam, it should stick to my hand upside down.
Yeah.
Right? Wet foam would have a lot more water in it, and it would just drip right off.
Yeah,
right? So
holding a lot more organic material in the dry foam.
and the easiest way to create dry foam is just to reduce the amount of air going into it. And that'll do 2 things. It'll actually add less air, but also it will decrease the velocity of air escaping out the top through the neck of the skimmer, causing a lot of that dry foam to pop prematurely normally. So if your goal is dry foam, less air in many cases is the best way to achieve that.
Now, there's a lot of parallels between what we're talking about in this dry versus wet and bubbles conversation versus, blowing bubbles with solution and whatnot. And there was a whole investigative series, probably 6 episodes of testing airflow and water and adjustments and all kinds of even experiments you can do at home.
So just to give that analogy, just for anybody who hasn't seen it, because this is something everybody can resonate with. Essentially, the top of your skimmer is that tube, and it's blowing air out of it. So if I'm sucking 600 liters an hour of air through there, 600 liters an hour needs to go out the top, and it's coming out pretty rapidly. If I'm only doing 100, it's coming out about 1/6 as fast, right? Okay, so imagine your little bubble wand. You're blowing these bubbles. You did it as a kid. You'll do it with some other kid someday. We go out, and it's hard. We actually do it in my backyard. We use those big, huge, giant rope ones, and getting the organic mix right is actually kind of hard.
Soap to water viscosity, and what's going to create a hardcore bubble with a thick membrane wall versus one that could just go pop. Yeah.
So when you dip that little wand in there and you blow through it, if it's got the right amount of organics in it, you can just blow all day and just tons of bubbles come out. If you now diluted that by 3-fold, now I have to blow so slightly, otherwise it just pops the moment that it comes out. There's not enough organics to hold the foam together. So in that same spirit, when you're working with your tank, if you got tons of turds and tons of food and tons of organics in there, you can probably pump in an enormous amount of water and maintain a lot of foam coming out of this thing. If you don't, and you have very little organics in there, very few fish and very few bits of food going in, Well, the velocity of air has got to go way, way down. Otherwise, it just pops as it's going out there, and you know exactly what it looks like.
Boiling on the top.
Yeah, tremendous amount of air in the skimmer, top to bottom, just boiling.
Yeah.
Not doing anything, not collecting any turds. It sure looks like it's working, but it's not working.
More air is not better.
So disadvantage to dry foam is actually a couple of things.
Yep.
One, it's that paste in the cup.
Like
so
you're actively removing gunk.
yeah, if you go in the cup and you scoop out a handful of poop, it's essentially poop and decaying food in your hand if you're wearing a glove. But like that is one export method. Like if I scoop it, if it collects in something and I can scoop it and take it out of the tank.
It's now out of the tank.
Yeah, and it's very real. There's a very real amount of gunk that came out in there. And actually, if you dissolved all that gunk in the water, it's probably way darker than the water or the tea that you're pulling out. So it might be one of the more valuable ways of actually pulling it out. But also an advantage is it doesn't pop as fast and it works in a wider array of tanks. So dry foam with a little bit of air, less air will actually work in the widest variety of environments.
Yeah.
It may not pull out as much as you could in a really high density environment, but you actually see, I had some videos of it in my own tank where when I put it too dry, what would happen is the foam would get so thick, it would actually lift the lid off, and then out of all the little holes in the top, this foam would pour out, but it wouldn't foam out and drip. It was so thick that it just like kind of like cakes all over the place.
Yeah.
And then people are like, oh, you should put some mineral oil or something on there or whatever, so they'll pop. I'm like, no, I will just turn up the air to match the more organics, and then the foam thins out, and I'm actually still pulling all the garbage out instead of letting it pop prematurely.
We also believe matters most the disadvantage to dry, on the opposite end of that, the dry paste. The disadvantage of the dry paste is that it probably isn't removing as much as far as like a wet could, especially in a high organic environment.
Yeah, wet skimmate has more water in it is the wetter if you get past the dry, like so wet that it doesn't work anymore.
It's just
not
water.
the right answer.
Yeah.
Somewhere in there, like super, super dry does work, and it works in the widest of areas with the least amount of work and tuning. But if you really want to get more out of it, it's definitely on the mid to wet range, where it's consistently just producing foam that flows over the edge. That is probably the area where you're going to remove the most waste. So dry, easier, but maybe not the most effective possible.
And we're going to get into it in here in just a bit, but this dry versus wet conversation we're having is 100% to do with how much air and air volume with the organic mixture, not my little gate valve and how I'm collecting it, wet versus dry.
Okay, you're going to talk about the gate valve. Just throw that mentality in the trash.
Yeah, we'll get there. We'll get there. We also believe matters most is that wet foam has a higher ratio of water and air to organics. Yeah, it's wet. So I'm pulling not only just organics and everything else, but I'm pulling more water. I'm collecting more water. So that tea-colored water in your skimmer, not as many organics, a lot more water though.
So if you can imagine, like if I would say I took like a little beaker full of dry foam, right, and a beaker full of wet foam, and then I measured the organics on it. The dry foam of the equivalent amount will probably have a lot more organics in it. The wet foam, and the reason I know that is because it's building a stable head that isn't popping. It's the organics that's doing that. It's not the water or air. So the fact that it's a dry, stable head of foam is representative of why there's so much more organics in it. However, the wet foam will have more water in it. So here's the conundrum though, is the dry foam actually collects really slow. It's just very slowly collected. So if, like, pretend the dry foam had 3 times as much organics in it as the wet foam, but I was able to capture 6 times as much wet foam as dry foam, the wet foam was twice as effective.
Yeah.
And so there is a matrix in there that you'll have to figure out for yourself. But once you understand how to create the foam, and it isn't all that much different than just dipping a bubble wand in there and thinking about how that's going to work. And I can't just walk up and blow on it if it's really there's not a lot of garbage in my tank. But if there is a lot, man, we can let this guy go. Yeah, think about how it all fits together, and you'll have a better result for sure. The next one. is
the wet advantage. What we believe matters most, so we're talking about the wet foam again. The advantage to wet is that when you tune it just right, or when you tune it right, it actually removes more waste consistently. If there's I have a certain amount of fish, I feed a certain amount a day, there's a steady amount, a predictable amount of organics in my tank at any given time, right? And now I have a wet collection where the amount of water and the organics that I'm collecting matches the amount of organics that are in the tank at any given time. I can rely on it. It will consistently be pulling out, meaning that there's there's not a fluctuation when you're skimming dry.
Actually, one of the ways that we tested, you can test this for yourself if you want to know which way and where you kind of optimally
Which
tune.
works best for you, yeah.
Which was go take your little Mr. Chili jug, which is like a gallon
clear
container.
Yeah.
Tune this to your best of your ability dry, right? Collect whatever you're going to collect for a day. Pour it in that jug and add water to it, fill it all up. Next day, collect it and tune it to as wet as you think is functional. Collect that, pour that in another jug and shake it up. Whichever one is darkest in the end,
that was the most effective.
Is probably the most effective. So like a really quick home test on figuring out how much organics is in there, because you probably won't get a good gallon of either one in a single day.
Right.
And getting 6 times as much wet actually, even though it looks thinner in there, be more effective than 1/6 as much dry. And to your scenario, in the best of your ability to tune the specific tool that you have on your tank, that's maybe the best way to figure it out. It's also just kind of a fun project.
It is pretty fun.
You actually had a video on that.
Yeah, there is. The episode in that series of skimmer testing, there is an episode that has 3 jugs in a windowsill is the thumbnail of it, and it tells you how to go about that and then what to do with the information.
I forget, man, which one won? Was it the dry one?
I think it was middle of the road.
Was it really?
I think so.
Fingers.
We did 3 different ones. We're super dry, super wet, and then middle of the road. I'm pretty sure middle of the road won out.
Go figure. I mean, that would be the expected outcome, right?
Of course.
Okay, this is the one that you just mentioned, the gate valve thing.
Oh yeah. Well, just before we get there, let's finish this thought on the wet. The disadvantage of wet foam is that it's harder to tune. It's more susceptible to current organic load by the minute. So you've got your air-water mixture, so you're collecting now. If the organic levels change in the tank, my skimmer could go crazy. Like I'm collecting water and it fills up, maybe a half or a quarter of the actual collection cup a day. What happens when the organic load changes to the point where my skimmer goes crazy? Now I'm susceptible to the skimmer leaking, spitting nasty poo water all over the place, fire hazards, everything that we talked about with redundancy.
If you ride the razor's edge of wet, what will happen is you got to tune to a specific format, which is I can tune it to several hours after I have fed the water, and in which case, like maybe the skimmer will have removed a lot by then, and all of a sudden it will stop. If I tuned it to the moment that I added the food and that it dissolved in there and it was most likely to remove a lot of it.
Probably safe.
Well, it would work, but then what happened as soon as the organics are removed from the tank and the skimmer worked, all of a sudden we're blowing air too fast to create a foam head and all the bubbles are popping, and you'll look in there and you'll see, oh look, it just looks like a boiling pot of water.
It's not doing anything.
It's not doing anything. Well, you only tuned it to work when the most organics are in there. The inverse is true. Is like, what if I tuned it to work, at the best time is 8 hours after feeding? Well, then when I do feed the thing and I add no organics, it's going to do what you just described, which is explode all over the place. So that is kind of the disadvantage of wet. Is you will ultimately probably get more nutrients and organics out of the tank, but when you ride the razor's edge, there's other problems that come along with.
Easy. Water level, when that thing goes a little too high.
Okay.
Back to our discussion about about the gate valve and whether or not is tuning your gate valve the difference between wet and dry skimming, and it's not. It's all about the air mixture and the amount of organics and how you adjust one or the other. So what we believe matters most is that the gate valve does not create dry or wet foam. It just changes the collection point. So I have a lot of air being injected into the body of my skimmer. There's a lot of organics. I'm going to have this, this foam going. If I decide to run dry, the gate valve, all it does is just change how much am I collecting? Am I collecting a lot of that wet foam fast, or am I collecting some of that wet foam slower? And then when you turn it to dry, same thing.
Yeah, the gate valve isn't changing it from wet to dry, it just changes how you collect it.
And sometimes, in like maybe an AC pump or a non-adjustable pump, that water level in the body and the pressure it puts back on the pump might change how much air is actually being drawn in the skimmer, and in some degree changing the wet or the dry collection. But wet and dry comes down to air and organics.
As an artifact of head pressure, when you raise the water level up, it will suck in a little bit less air because the pump isn't spinning as fast. But most of what you're doing is the pumps, you're creating the foam that you're creating. And like in theory, I guess if you put it really low, most of the foam will actually pop and explode before it goes over the end. And then the last little bit that finally makes its way over its edge is like dry, I guess.
Yeah.
But you're not really creating dry or wet foam. You're just changing how you collect the foam engine. So changing the amount of air and water and organic mix is changing how the foam engine creates foam. Changing the water height in there is just changing where it collects the foam. And so if I move the water height really high, well, then I guess I'm going to get it wetter, but now I'm also super susceptible to when I dump some food in, all of a sudden it just explodes, right?
Yeah.
And you're trying to find that medium ground, but there has to be an evolution in the knowledge of how a foam bubble is created, and a foam bubble is not created by creating a gate valve going up and down. A foam bubble is created by a mixture of air, organics, and water.
Yeah.
So it is we should just scrub that conversation from our DNA.
I run wet because my water level is so high. I run dry because my water level is so low. It's actually not. It's the dynamic of the bubble.
Yeah, I can understand the mentality because it was the best that we had at the time.
Because I'm collecting what I'm collecting when I have it way up high is a lot of water, because a lot of water spills over. And what I'm collecting when I have it turned down low is a lot of scum on the neck.
Okay, it is true that if you put it all the way to the top, you are collecting more wet foam, I guess. And if you put it way down in the bottom, you're collecting less dry foam. But you aren't changing how the foam engine works. You're just changing the point at which you collect it. Now, if I want to change how the foam engine works and create the type of foam that I want, and then tune to how I collect it, that is where I will collect dry, or intentionally create dry or wet foam, and then tune it to collect it the best. All right.
There's a car analogy in there somewhere.
Yeah, definitely. If you, it's the whole combustion engine, right?
Yeah.
If I have air and gasoline, if I put too much gasoline, the thing stutters out and pops.
Yeah.
Right? If I don't put enough in it, it will sputter all over the place. I put the right amount, and it runs like a champ. Right? Yeah, go ahead.
We believe matters most is that DC is the best way to tune. Hands down, this conversation's over when it comes to tuning air and water mixture. DC is the best because I have steps that not only change the speed of the pump and the water, but also change the amount of air drawn. This was we bought a Hawk machine. I believe it's a Hawk machine, an air volumizer type thing that we can measure air per liters per minute or something like that. Yeah. So you can actually see the changes in the variation of air and air draw based on this different 5 or 6 or however many speeds of the skimmer pump. And now when it comes to adjusting, I bought my first DC skimmer thinking that, this thing is great, only because I bought it because it was quiet. I didn't know what to do with the 5 different steps or flow rates, and it wasn't until 2 or 3 years ago when I started investigating that. Oh, now I understand why this thing exists. And you can AC pumps. You can put an air valve on the air, but there's this dynamic of the sucking in of the one pump doing all of the work of sucking in air and sucking in water. The best DC solution, in my opinion, is recirculating. I have a pump that feeds water in, that's its sole purpose, and I have a pump that draws in air, that's its sole purpose, and I can adjust those two separately.
Yeah, so DC, what it will do is it will slow the pump down. When it slows the pump down, it will suck less air in there, right? And when I was first, like back in 2015, I mean, basically everything I was told is more air means more contact area, more better.
And there was a lot of skimmers doing the same thing in Par Wars was building this
Air Wars.
higher, Air Wars.
You know, the Vertex Omega things. Like,
One of
it's
the
milk,
most.
you know, top to
Yeah.
bottom. But like a lot of people complain that it just boils on the top, doesn't produce.
Can't tune this thing.
It's because there's so much air coming out of it, the bubbles just pop prematurely.
Yeah.
And you don't have enough organics. And then there's probably a group of people who are like, this thing works awesome. And those people probably feed a ton of food, and it was a really great option for them.
Yeah.
But like visually, I could go look at the cheap ones and see just this thin wisp of bubbles in it. And then the Vertex one, like top to bottom, milky.
bubbles.
Like, oh yeah, no, didn't work better. So yeah, DC definitely the best, easiest way to tune the amount of air that goes in it. And again, I didn't get it at all. Like I heard the quiet piece for sure, but like more or better. Why would I ever want to tune down the amount of air going in there? Because more air is better.
When I set mine up, I set it to the max setting, and then I've never touched it after that.
Okay, so what it should actually say is not like pump speed, or it shouldn't say air speed. It should say less poo, more poo. Right? If you got a lot of poo, crank up the air.
Crank her up.
If you don't have a lot of poo or food in there,
Turn that sucker
turn the
down.
air down. It'll actually perform better.
This leads back to our core belief and why it is a part of our core belief. A good skimmer is one that works just as well for 2 fish as it does for 20. Meaning, and this is that adjustability piece. When I can buy my forever skimmer, or if that's what you want to call it, I can buy my skimmer planning on my new tank knowing that eventually I'm going to have like 20 some fish in there. But because it's DC and I can adjust the amount of air and water mixture because I have such low organics, this now works for 2 fish. And when I add the next 5 fish, I can bump it up, and now it's working for that. And so I don't have to go buy a whole brand new skimmer because I'm stuck to one air and water mixture.
The only thing I wish that they would do is sell replaceable cups, because like basically I only got 2 fish. I don't have a coffee can full of foam being created. I only put 4 pellets in here today. So it's not great. So that's why like on the skimmers like the e-shops. So the e-shops have pretty small necks, and when we tested them, they actually can pull in less air. And if you had looked at that in the past, you would say, oh, less air, I wouldn't want that. It's not going to work that great. But actually, we found that it's probably going to be the plug-and-play one that works for most people right out of the box. And the fact that it has a smaller neck actually means that it takes less foam to be able to get the foam at the top.
Yeah.
So if I have a coffee can full of foam, I have to fill a coffee can full of foam before I get a little bit even over the top of this thing, right?
That's hard to do.
Yeah, if I got a little teeny nozzle, it's actually a lot easier.
That leads exactly into this next one of what we believe matters most. Too big is worse than too small for that very same fact.
I think, I'm not sure what I said in 2015, but I was told back then, man, everybody in my circle said, get the biggest, baddest skimmer that
That'll
you can
fit
get.
in your chamber.
And to be honest, it sounds good,
Yeah.
right? But now we know. Now we know differently that a bigger, badder skimmer doesn't have the organic load in it to be able to create the foam, and it is going to work poorer.
You overspent.
You are better off getting a smaller skimmer that will work all the time than a bigger skimmer that doesn't work. I mean, ideally, we would like to get the right tool, the right job, right in the middle. Thread the needle.
I mean, and you would think that, we're not telling, this is one of those moments when the marketing team, they're going to be like, shut up, go buy the big skimmer. No, buy the smallest skimmer. Don't get the big one.
Yeah, you know, it's funny. Get a tunable skimmer that
DC.
goes the gap, spends the gap for you, and going too big. And in this case, too big often means that the neck
just
is
the neck
super
size.
giant. You know?
Yeah. If you can find that again, leading to the next one, we believe matters most that someone should consider the neck size. And an adjustable neck size would mean that you can get a big skimmer. You know, if you have plans for a massive bioload or lots of fish, the only thing I have to do is adjust the air speed and take out the little neck and put it in the small neck. So my first 2 years of tank or 1 year of tank, I've got a little small neck inside my skimmer cup. And then once my tank matures, big neck.
Pop out a new one.
Yeah.
In the Royal Exclusive ones, the whole neck pops out of inside the cup, so you can clean it.
Those
really
are
easy.
so nice.
Imagine if you could just pop in different sizes. That'd be pretty sweet. Somebody could aftermarket that for sure. All right. So another one here is changing. Okay, this is an interesting one that a lot of people probably haven't picked up on, but changing how you collect the foam is easier than how you create the foam, right? And so, let's create the foam that you want. We'll use the foam engine. We'll use the DC thing and create the right amount of air, organics, and water mixture. And then the problem will be every time I change that stupid knob or gate valve, I am actually influencing the amount of air that's sucked into. So now that I've perfected it, when I change the level, I'm unperfecting it to some degree.
Yeah.
Not a lot, but enough that it might matter. And the problem is I'm also going to have to tune that thing, then sit there and watch it for 20 minutes and come back and make sure I tuned it to the right level.
That's so annoying.
There are different ways of raising and lowering the water level or the cup itself. So I think of the Deltec hang-on skimmer, and there's probably some other ones like this, where it just creates a level foam head, and then the thing you do is raise and lower the neck of the cup to open or close essentially the size of the collection chamber. If it's not creating a lot of foam, I just lower the cup, and then that little bit of foam flows over.
That hang on the back, the one that rings true to me because I didn't have the Deltec, but I had the Reef Octopus hang on the back. That was the collection method. There was a little rubber O-ring around there that we would set the cup height, and you could do the same thing. You could lower that thing down into the foam, or you could raise it up if the foam was way up here.
So that's also a piece about the recirculating skimmer that you mentioned earlier. In the recirculating skimmer, you usually have a fixed output on the end, and so the water level height is already, you don't have to use back pressure from the pump to make sure the water level's here. It's already got an exit point that comes out and the water leaves there.
Yeah.
But with something like the skimmer that I'm using on my tank, which is the Royal Exclusive Deluxe model, what happens is the pipe comes out and then it goes back up and back down, and there's a telescoping pipe. And so instead of using a valve that is going to raise or lower the water level based on back pressure, what I'm going to do is just raise the whole telescoping drain up, and visually I know where I brought it to. I know where the water level is on the bottom of this little elbow, and that is the height that the water level is going to be in the skimmer. And then I can use the gate valve thing as like a fine tuning element.
Right.
But the telescoping thing, I don't know, why that piece hasn't picked up in other protein skimmers, to be honest, because that is a sweet, sweet way to monitor or set the level at which you collect foam from your foam engine.
Especially if you're not going to go recirculating.
Yes, especially then. Second best to that, for sure.
Yeah, actually, recirculating is my go-to if you have the space for it.
If you got the space, they don't make a lot of designs for
I know,
this, especially DC.
Yeah, I know. We also believe matters most is that a skimmer is the biggest gas exchange you can have on your tank. When we're talking about gas exchange, a lot of times people are like, oh, point your power heads up, create that turbulent surface on the top of the water, you're getting good gas exchange. Think about the surface area of the top of the tank and how many times that rolls over versus every single tiny little bubble inside your protein skimmer, the surface around every single one, the millions and billions of bubbles in that body, pulling air from the surrounding area, that is where all of that gas exchange is happening the most.
So if I think of in my skimmer, I'm holding 3 gallons of water or something, whatever it might be, inside of there, I mean, every bit of that water is just being whisked with gas exchange, with air from the outside over and over again. It is the single point of gas exchange in the whole tank, both in terms of incorporating or removing CO2 from the water, as well as oxygen exchange as well.
100%.
So
undeniable.
Skimmer.
But
if you didn't buy it for nutrients, buy it for gas exchange.
Yeah, and for the reason that pH, it matters. So we believe what matters most is that the skimmer, because it's the biggest gas exchange in your tank, it is also the pH solution for many. So if you are having the pH issues or This is where that 50% growth in your corals come from in our core belief that the best skimmer will increase your coral growth by 50%. It's all based on that pH and keeping it 8.3.
Corals calcify much faster at 8.3. They're just able to precipitate out their coral skeleton or their calcium carbonate-based skeleton much faster. This is well known by marine biologists. We did the BRSTV Investigates, which proved it in our own environment as a hobbyist as well. I don't know anybody who doesn't want 50% more growth out of their coral. If you're it, then raise your hand. It's probably only somebody who's endgame, who's already got the thing totally full.
Yeah.
But if you're in the first couple of years of this, everyone wants the things to grow 50% faster. And it's 50% compounding, by the way. We saw 50% inside of a couple of months, but the next 50% is going to be based on top of that 50%, and so on and so on. So you're going to fill it out in a fraction of the time if you can maintain that 8.3. So 8.3 in the tank, it can be done a variety of ways. You can do it with chemicals.
You can?
So you could choose to use kalkwasser as your calcium alkalinity solution. You could use, I think Triton is going to be one of the best commercially available at raising the pH from a 2-part, has the highest lift.
Refugium.
You can do it with a refugium, sucking out CO2 out of the water. You could do it with, I'm trying to think of another one.
Fresh air skimmer lines.
Open up your
is
windows
an
and
option.
stuff like
Open
that.
up windows, all of that. But the about all of those is that it's not consistent. It's not always consistent pH. You're talking like when at night when the pH goes down in the tank naturally because the photosynthesis isn't happening, or your refugium that only runs at night is having the pH effect, but during the day it's not. Or your 2-part only maybe you don't have enough demand for your 2-part solution, so there's really not a whole lot going in there to keep the pH up on its own. But you can use the skimmer to create a consistent level all the time, constantly.
You know what's funny is the things that are causing the acidity of the ocean are the same thing that's causing the acidity in your house, actually. Which is in your house, or in the ocean, it's all the excess carbon dioxide we're pumping into the air these days. And what it does is increases the amount of carbonic acid in the ocean and decreases the pH. In our house is the same thing.
Same thing.
We sealed our houses up for efficiency, and we're filling the things up with carbon dioxide from us breathing,
in it,
our pets, all of those kinds of things. And so one of the things that nobody has done really well yet is incorporate CO2 scrubbing media into a protein skimmer. There's lots of DIY ones. I actually implemented one in my own tank yesterday, so I'll probably shoot a little video on Facebook about it. But the skimmer is the best solution because if you scrub all the CO2 out of the gas exchange that's happening in the skimmer, and you can raise the pH like anywhere from a few tenths to maybe even too much, and you'll have to put a control on it, is that it's not reliant on any additive that goes into the tank. You're not reliant on, and it doesn't, you can actually peg it with solenoids. Just keep it 8.3 24/7.
It's adjustable, and like you said, with the solenoid and shutting off air coming into the skimmer from the ambient room or air coming from in the skimmer from the CO2 scrubber, like I can actually adjust. Hey, I need a little more 8.3 out of you, where I can't like, hey, I need more. I need to add more alkalinity because my pH is low. Well, that's going to throw my alkalinity off and my water chemistry. It's not as adjustable as a scrubber.
So for those of you that are not tracking with us, the protein skimmer, all you do is take a CO2 scrubber that has media in it that sucks all the CO2 out. It's the same stuff that people use for like diving or even in space, to scrub the stuff out. And what happens is when you have the skimmer suck air through there, it's giving it CO2-free air going into this thing, and it's whisking it all together, and it's not adding CO2 or carbonic acid to the tank anymore. and then the pH of the tank rises. So you will burn through a little bit of media. People are working on recirculating designs that actually like reduce the amount of media used
Right.
to very, very little.
Yeah.
This is the future. And when we say a good skimmer is one that works well for 20 fish as well as 20, that's typical, skimmer things. And I think everybody out there would agree that I wish that it would work when I bought it.
Yeah.
I had a small tank, and I wish that it would work when the tank is full.
I only want to buy it once.
I don't know anybody that wants something different, and I know a lot of people that don't have that experience. Right? The best skimmer will also own the fact that it is the primary source of gas exchange on the tank, and can increase, done well, will increase the growth rate of your coral by itself, man, 50%.
Whew, that's a smart skimmer.
All right, so some hard lessons with skimmers. First one.
First hard lesson with skimmers is that water level is the worst way to tune a skimmer. We hit that one a couple different ways, but yes, the water, but this was specifically the water level in the sump. So adjusting the 9 inches versus 10 inches versus 11 inches and where your skimmer depth is the worst way to tune your skimmer. And most of the time that manufacturers have the rating, and I did another part of these skimmer tests, was how much air draw when it was in 2 inches of water and 3 inches and 4 inches and 5, all the way up to like 14 and 15 and all these other different inches. And you find that somewhere in the recommended manufacturers, so most of the times the manufacturers were dead on. If you set it at 8 inches, you're going to get a good amount of air draw. So trying to tune the skimmer by adjusting that water level in the sump, not that great.
I think that also applies to
the gate valve.
The gate valve,
Yeah,
as
100%.
well. Worst way. The one thing that we didn't cover, and I'll say also is a hard lesson, is with an AC pump, tuning it with an air valve. You mentioned it just for a second.
We did, and I did that test too. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to explain like what's happening then. So with a DC pump, I slow down the motor, and then because the motor slows down, it sucks in less air. With an AC pump, the exact opposite happens. When I if I put an air valve on there and slow the amount of air or restrict the air, the pump will actually spin faster now and suck more water because you're not filling the pump motor full of air. Mm-hmm. So what happens is they'll pump more water, which will increase the water level. And so like when you're doing these things, there's like so many things that are going against each other. You're also decreasing the contact time because the water's being pumped through there twice as fast as it was before. The skimmer wasn't really designed for that. It might be too small and not have enough contact time. So I won't say that putting an air valve on an AC skimmer is a bad idea. It just will not do the same thing as DC, which slows the motor along with the air. And when I slow the motor, I'll increase the contact time because which is good, man, because in the reality of it is if I have to slow it down, it means there's less organics in the water. Otherwise, I'd have more air and I'd go for wetter. With less organics to create that foam head, also probably benefits from the fact that now I'm pumping water through it slower, which increases the contact time or dwell time inside the skimmer, increasing the likelihood that those bubbles are actually going to remove it. DC, way better option.
DC, way better option.
Okay. In fact, I don't know why that hasn't been embraced in its entirety, but it should.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Another hard lesson here.
Next one is more air is not better. There's a boil. Yeah. This is where your lid just went like this and shuts things everywhere.
If you look at your skimmer and you're saying, man, there's tons of air in there, but it's not producing anything, a bunch of people will tell you it's like some kind of manufacturing oil or needs to break in or blah, 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 blah. It is more likely that you just have too much air for the amount of organics and all the bubbles are just popping on the top.
And that's when you have a DC one, you just turn it down.
Yep, more likely that than anything. Another hard lesson is huge necks are for a ton of organics. So if you're going to buy a skimmer with a giant, huge neck that's rated for 600 gallons, you better have 600 gallons worth of turds in there. So otherwise it won't work. You won't be able to produce enough foam for it to actually flow over.
Hard lesson is that a good skimmer, the good ones will have carbon on the lid. And I've seen aftermarket ideas of this. And then I've seen like Avast Marine's, skimmate lockers that incorporate carbon on the top. But not really one manufacturer that stands out that says, we put carbon on the top of mine because the air is blowing through the poo and straight out the top of the lid. All those little circles on the holes on the top of your skimmer lid, those are just air vents. And the only air coming out of that skimmer and that skimmer cup is poopy air.
It's just little fart holes.
That's exactly what it is.
So even with like the vast marine, what will happen is it will let all the fluid go down there, and the stinky fluid will now be down in there, and there's a little carbon thing on the top of it.
All the air still going through the top of the skimmer lid.
Air is still passing all that turd on the wall and decaying food and going out the holes in there. So, and again, if it doesn't stink, it's because it's not working, and there's no other unless the skimmer is capable of making non-smelly poo, which in case them, and that now is the best one. Non-smelly poo is a magic elixir. I don't know.
There's not such a thing.
Okay. You're also another hard. So a carbon on the lid. I ended up having to just use a nylon mesh bag,
just
like
set
a
it on
filter
the top.
bag, and filled it with carbon and just set it on the top, and that worked. The poo smell coming out of the top of the Royal Exclusive skimmer is now nullified because the carbon captures it. But the next one here is a smaller size skimmer. Hard lesson is you don't want to go too big if you're going to use felt rollers or are really good about your, or really even the filter socks at all.
Yeah, Royal Exclusive told you specifically when you're getting this Dream Box sump and you have a filter roller, and the design of your filter roller means nothing's getting by that paper and that doesn't pass through the paper and it's really wide. You're pulling all of these the potential organics that could be pulled up by your skimmer. You're pulling them out before it even has a chance to break down into organics that your skimmer can pull. Essentially meaning there's less fuel in the water because it's being pulled out in real time. Meaning I don't need a bigger skimmer to. A bigger skimmer is going to be less effective.
Think about the whole approach to filtration. Like essentially, for the foam engine to work, it needs a certain amount of organics to work at that size skimmer, that size neck, that size air, or whatever. If on that same, let's say it was rated for 200 gallons, if on that same 200-gallon tank I removed half of the fuel or organics using a different thing, it doesn't matter what it is, in this case being felt or filter socks, well, then, you know what? I need half the size of the skimmer because I don't need it. In fact, it's not going to work because the fuel ratio is wrong.
I'll be upset.
So that was the beauty of that interaction with Royal Exclusive, actually, was like
they
when
understand.
Somebody says, hey, here's a $2,500 option, but I suggest you get the $1,800 one. You suggest I give you $700 less?
Like, yeah,
Yep.
You're not going to need it.
Yeah, I know. But that's probably true of all of them, not just at that scale.
When you're pairing your filtration approaches, if filter rollers in your game and you're going to be pulling this stuff out in real time, you can downgrade that skimmer size. You should.
Yeah, and the nature of that is like with the roller mat especially, or the fleece material, because you're rolling the turd and the food like right out of the tank. The worst part actually is with if you're using a filter sock and don't change it, it actually all just breaks down in the filter sock area, and you have the worst combination because the skimmer actually isn't working anymore because half of the organics are stuck in this filter sock, is breaking down into nitrate and phosphate inside of the filter sock, and then it doesn't even get removed. So the filter sock is all it really doing is just like creating excess nitrogen and phosphate and starving the other filter at the same time. Not a good move.
Lose-lose situation.
Yep. Unless you change out the filter socks frequently, in which case it isn't doing that. But if you just let the filter sock capture all of the turd and let it rot in there until it breaks down back into the tank, some of it probably breaks into protein chains that can be removed by the skimmer. Some of it also doesn't.
Hard lesson learned is that pH may drive, or a skimmer may drive pH down. And this goes back to it being the number one source of gas exchange in your tank. Well, if I have CO2 laden surrounding air and me and my dogs and my family and everybody's breathing in this enclosed building or in the enclosed house and it's wintertime so my windows aren't open, I am now pumping a whole lot of CO2 laden air into the tank, meaning more carbonic acid, meaning driving pH down.
Meaning here at the office, when there's 100 people here over the weekdays, well, you know what? The pH here on most of the tanks here is pretty low. Unless you're willing to scrub the CO2 out with a CO2 scrubber on your skimmer, the chances of you maintaining a higher pH in this environment is really low. There's so many people breathing carbon dioxide and in turn carbonic acid being introduced to the tank.
When you watch it on the weekend.
The weekend, then it shoots all the way back up to the 8.3 range. You know, it'll go up 3 or 4 tenths of a point all the way back up. You know, just because there's nobody breathing here on the weekend. So on the weekdays, basically the skimmer is going to be incorporating that stuff faster than if we just turn the skimmer off. And in this case, we're pulling out all the nutrients as well. So what are you going to do? Something to think about. And you might want to even just try it. Turn your skimmer off and see what the effect is on the pH of your tank.
If your pH goes up, it would be, hard lesson is that hang-ons are a flood risk. No matter which way you flip it, the hang-on. Like I've flooded my reef octopus hang on the back 1000, my BH 1000, and it was because an anemone got beat up in the power head. Excess organics filled up my skimmer. My skimmer went crazy, and the only place for this water to go after your skimmer cup overflows on a hang on the back is on your floor. Or sometimes the pump is outside of the skimmer body, and maybe you didn't tighten up one of the unions during maintenance enough. Water on the floor.
I will tell you, hang-ons are super duper duper popular skimmers. In my first one, I had like 3 or 4 of them. All of them flooded at some way or another. One of them a real flood. Another one, like the Prism Pro thing, was a real flood. The other ones outside of that could be just because the skimmer cup went crazy, and the skimmer cup isn't over a sump or tank, and so floor is the only option. There's a bunch of different reasons. So for me, if I was going to use a hang-on, I think I'd skip the hang-on. I would think of the in-tank options, like the Tunes Comline one.
Yeah, those ones sit inside.
It looks like magnets into the tank, and kind of has it looks almost like an overflow tower.
Yeah.
It looks really slick in the tank.
It's black.
They have this big thing hanging on the back of the tank. They have a DC adjustable version as well.
Which means air adjustment.
Yeah. In that case, I will tell you, my experience is it doesn't work as well as some of the highest performing hang on the back options, but I'll give up a little bit of performance to not flood my floor every time.
100%.
So other people may be a different camp. You can decide on your own. Another hard lesson here is anybody who's tried ozone on your skimmer, in theory, what it should do is increase the amount of organics you pull from the tank. Basically, what it will do is change the polarity of some of the organics in the tank and make them attract to the bubble surface more. However, if you use too much ozone, it changes all of the polarity. It actually makes things repel from each other. My experience is getting that right and the right amount of ozone and mixing it with what the intended purpose is, which is actually making the water crystal clear, is super duper hard. And I've never added ozone to a skimmer where it didn't do anything but hurt the skimmer's performance. It turned into a boiling pot of water almost every time.
Oh, I have zero experience with the ozone, but
I will
it'd
tell
be
you,
fun to test.
You know what we said earlier, though?
Yeah.
We said that what would be a miracle would be the non-stinky poo.
Ozone might be that answer.
Ozone would be the answer because you'd have excess ozone going over the stinky poo smell. And it'll come out smelling like lightning.
We're going to do an investigates where we grade the stink of the poo stink on a scale of 1 to 10. Performance-wise, yeah.
All right, so big question. What's next?
Next, we have tomorrow, day 5. We're going over at least another 4 episodes, and it might actually be 5 or 6. We got to go take a look at what the topics are. But we are going over the next episodes of 52 Weeks of Reefing right here at noon, again, Central Time. Today, a 3-hour and 12-minute session.
Seems about to be about the number.
We're going to break these up into those 4 episodes that you saw today. We're going to break them up individually, release those later on, so that way you... to get to the nugget about the fart smell and protein skimmer, you don't have to listen to 2.5 hours of conversation.
All right. See you tomorrow at noon.